Chapter 30-20. Whoosh. There was a flash of white light and Ji Tianxing descended from the sky, landing in Westwind Town. The eyes and divine senses of the 300 celestial gods gathered on him. They all sneered, their eyes filled with mocking killing intent. Even the 100 or so lesser divine lords outside the palace noticed Ji Tianxing's arrival and began to size him up with their divine senses. Ji Tianxing walked toward the palace without a change in expression, ignoring everyone's reaction. 100 breaths later, he arrived at the palace gates. The lower divine lords guarding outside the palace all looked at him in unison. Many of them quietly gripped their swords and sabers, their expressions wary and wary. They had no choice. They had heard of Ji Tianxing's fame and battle achievements many times and were extremely afraid of Ji Tianxing. There were also some lesser divine lords who were gloating, sneering with mocking expressions and even whispering to each other. So his Tianxing. There's nothing special about him. Ha ha. I heard that he was vicious and powerful, a ruthless character that could not be provoked. Now it seems that he's just SOSO. No matter how ruthless a character is, in front of our Lord, won't he still obediently surrender and accept his death? He clearly knows that this is his grave and he still dares to come alone. I really admire his fearlessness. This guy's brain must have been flooded with water. Isn't it just his daughter being captured? He can just have another child with his wife. Why throw away his life? So, even the most powerful expert has weaknesses and openings. Our Lord is still the most powerful. Everyone discussed in low voices as they sized up Ji Tianxing with complicated expressions. Ji Tianxing looked straight ahead, ignoring the numerous lesser divine lords as he strode into the hall. The palace was very spacious. Although it was old, it was exceptionally clean and spotless. There were gemstone lamps embedded in the walls, emitting a bright divine light that illuminated the palace. When Ji Tianxing walked into the main hall, he saw a luxurious throne inlaid with gems at the head of the hall. A thin young man wearing a golden python robe and a dark golden crown sat on the throne. This person could be considered handsome. His face was as pale as paper and his fingers were slender and clean. He looked rather cultured and refined. Unfortunately, his eyes ruined his temperament. His eyes were long and narrow like willow leaves, slanted upward toward his temples. Even under normal circumstances, his eyes were narrowed, making him look very cold and gloomy. He was definitely not a straightforward person. One could tell at a glance that this person was the most low-key and patient fifth prince. On his left, there were 2 Sir God experts in blue robes and purple robes who were standing by the side of the throne. To his right were 3 divine lords, 2 of them were middle-aged divine race experts. The strongest one was the black-robed, white-haired old man. While Ji Tianxing was sizing up the fifth prince and the others, everyone's eyes were also focused on him, sizing him up with interest. Ha ha. You clearly know that this is the place this king chose for you to be buried, but you still came here without hesitation. Tianxing, I really admire your courage. The fifth prince looked down at Ji Tianxing, his right hand gently pinching his clean chin as he said with a smile. How is it? At this moment, what are your thoughts? Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said in a low voice, I've arrived on time. Where's my daughter, Wu Shuang? The fifth prince smirked and said, What's the hurry? Your daughter is fine. I don't want to do anything to a child. But you've already done it, Ji Tianxing said coldly. Shame and anger flashed in the fifth prince's eyes, but he immediately covered it up. He quickly changed the topic and said with a cold smile, From the day you offended me and became my enemy, you were destined to end up like this. Although I've lost a few times during this period. That's because I've never taken you seriously and underestimated you. Now that I've taken you as my opponent and set up such a big formation to kill you, you must be honored, right? Ji Tianxing said indifferently, You thought you were noble and disdained to take me as your opponent. But the result was that you repeatedly failed in front of me, and even your most loyal lackey, the Bloodsword sect, was wiped out by me. Such a tragic defeat caused you to suffer heavy losses, lose face, and become the laughingstock of the entire divine kingdom. So, you did not hesitate to gather so many experts to deal with me, just to wash away your shame. Now the more proud you are, the more you want to vent your anger and resentment, the more it proves how badly you lost and how embarrassed you were. Indeed, the fifth prince had long hated him to the bone and regarded him as a thorn in his side. It was not easy to set up this trap and lure Ji Tianxing to West Wind Town. How could he bear to kill him? That would not be enough to vent his anger. He wanted to humiliate Ji Tianxing and torture Ji Tianxing. When his anger subsided, he would completely kill Ji Tianxing. But Ji Tianxing had long been aware of the fifth prince's thoughts. These words were merciless and exposed the fifth prince's shameful act in front of everyone. The fifth prince's heart burst with anger again, his hands trembling and the corners of his eyes twitching. However, he was confident of victory and considered himself the winner, so he quickly suppressed his anger. Ha ha! No wonder you make enemies everywhere and are so hateful. The fifth prince grinned and sneered, not hiding the murderous look on his face. Speaking another word to a lowly person like you is blasphemy to me, Ji Tianxing said indifferently. Some people look like gold and jade, but are actually worthless. They think they are noble and unparalleled, but are actually as lowly as insects. And some people's nobility and extraordinariness are beyond your imagination. The fifth prince flew into a rage again, his fists were clenched so tightly that creaking sounds could be heard. The veins on his forehead were bulging, and he almost could not help but attack. Too hateful, too damn infuriating. The blue-robed divine lord beside the throne immediately scolded, "Little bastard, don't be so arrogant. Your daughter is in our hands, and now you are also a prisoner. Don't forget your situation. The life and death of you and your daughter are in the hands of the fifth prince. If you want your daughter to live, kneel down and kowtow obediently and beg for mercy." When the fifth prince heard these words, the anger in his heart subsided. "Men, bring that little girl here." Following his order, the stone door in the corner of the hall opened. Two lower divine lords in silver armor escorted Ji Wushuang into the main hall. The moment Ji Wushuang appeared, Ji Tianxing looked at her with concern, checking on her condition. Fortunately, she had not been hurt or tortured. Her delicate hair and clothes were neat and tidy, and her mental state was also very clear. However, she was tied up with a dark golden rope, and her arms were behind her back. Not only was it difficult for her to move, but her divine power was also sealed. She could not fly or use divine powers. But no matter what, seeing that she was safe and sound, Ji Tianxing was completely relieved. The two divine lords escorted Wushuang to the fifth prince's throne. The fifth prince took out a dagger that glowed with green light and said with a cold smile, "I can't believe that such a lowly race and bloodline like yours could give birth to such a delicate and cute daughter. But I hate perfect things the most. If I can cut this pretty little face a few times, it should be very satisfying, right?" Chapter 30:21. Although Ji Wushuang also had the strength of a god. Even if her face was cut a few times, she could heal the injury and recover to her original state. But Ji Tianxing was still worried. The fifth prince's ferocity would leave a psychological shadow on Wushuang. He didn't want his daughter to be hurt in the slightest. Fortunately, Ji Wushuang had been very calm and had a composure that didn't match her age. Even when the fifth prince put on such a big show and waved a poisoned dagger in front of her, she was never afraid. She just looked at Ji Tianxing worriedly, afraid that he would also fall here. After all, there were hundreds of experts and strong people in West Wind Town. Ji Tianxing couldn't leave alive by himself. Ji Tianxing stared coldly at the fifth prince and shouted in a deep voice, "If you are still a man and still care about the face of the royal family and nobles, then come at me." This was exactly what the fifth prince wanted. He sneered and said, "Ha ha. I was waiting for you to say that. If you don't want anything to happen to your daughter, then kneel down and kowtow to me." When he said this, the fifth prince was in an extremely good mood. The 5 monarchs beside him also showed a mocking smile, waiting to see Ji Tianxing make a fool of himself. Everyone knew that even if Ji Tianxing knelt down and kowtowed, the fifth prince wouldn't forgive him. He would definitely die without a doubt. But before killing him, the fifth prince had to humiliate him severely to vent his anger. Ji Tianxing was silent and stared coldly at the fifth prince, as if he was hesitating and weighing the pros and cons. But in fact, he secretly said to Ji Wushuang, "Wushuang, don't be afraid, Dad will take you away safely." Do you still remember the divine power I taught you back then? Ji Wuxuang's divine power was sealed and she couldn't use divine power, but her divine soul wasn't unconscious and could still communicate with her divine consciousness. She immediately understood Ji Tianxing's meaning and asked, "Dad, are you talking about that phoenix returns to the nest?" Of course Wuxuang remembers, I even cultivated it once not long ago. Phoenix's nest was a divine ability that Ji Tianxing had imparted to Ji Wuxuang many years ago. This included Yun Yarrow and Ji Wuhan, who had also cultivated this supreme technique. This divine ability was very mysterious, but it didn't have any destructive power. It was just a method of directional spatial teleportation. To put it simply, as long as one executed Phoenix returns to nest, one could instantly teleport into the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. No matter what kind of situation or space they were in, they would be able to return directly to the divine pagoda. Of course, the spellcaster had to be within a certain distance from the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. Being too far would not do. Ji Tianxing's heart was filled with gratification. He transmitted his voice to Qin Mu, although your divine power is sealed and you can't use Phoenix returns to nest, you can still use it. However, Father will use that divine ability and use the power of the divine pagoda to take you back. You must not resist. This was the miraculous part of the Phoenix's nest. Not only could the cultivator use it, but the tower holder could also use it in reverse. Ji Wuxuang didn't answer. He quietly winked at Ji Tianxing, indicating that he understood. Meanwhile, the 5th prince and the other divine emperors couldn't help but urge Ji Tianxing when they saw that he was silent. "Tianxing, what are you waiting for? Do you think my knife isn't sharp enough? Kid, you have to think carefully. Is your face more important or your daughter's life more important? Do you think it's as simple as cutting your daughter's face? The blue soul poison on the dagger can corrode her divine soul and turn her into a complete lunatic and idiot. Kid, the 5th prince's patience is limited. Don't court death." Seeing that everyone was impatient, the dagger in the 5th prince's hand was already itching to try. Ji Tianxing didn't hesitate any longer and immediately activated the mark of the divine pagoda on his left arm. A mysterious connection immediately formed between the divine pagoda and Ji Wuxuang. Ji Tianxing quietly circulated his divine power and executed Phoenix returns to nest as quickly as possible. Swoosh! The next moment, a white light shot out from his left arm and enveloped Ji Wuxuang at an incredible speed. Ji Wuxuang was already prepared. When the mysterious white light enveloped her, she instantly disappeared. A quarter of an instant later, she appeared on the 5th floor of the divine pagoda and stood in the origin divine array. Even though she was still bound by the dark golden rope and couldn't use divine power, she was completely safe. Even an ordinary divine king expert couldn't break into the divine pagoda and hurt her. She was out of danger, but instead of rejoicing, she became even more worried. Dad saved me and will definitely anger the 5th prince and the other divine emperors. Would he be able to withstand the siege of so many experts and safely escape from West Wind Town? Dad has always been meticulous and reliable. He should be confident, right? Ji Wuxuang stood on the altar and muttered to herself. At the same time, the 5th prince and the other divine emperors widened their eyes in disbelief, as if they had seen a ghost. Especially the 5th prince. The smug and mocking smile on his face froze on the spot. He looked at his empty left hand and then looked at Ji Tianxing's arm, confusion flashing through his eyes. A moment ago, he was holding Ji Tianxing in his left hand and holding a poisoned dagger in his right, forcing Ji Tianxing to kneel and admit his guilt. But now, Ji Wuxuang had disappeared. Without any leverage, how could he threaten and humiliate Ji Tianxing? Bastard! What did you do? The 5th prince glared angrily at Ji Tianxing. His chest was burning with rage, and his expression was ferocious as if he was about to devour someone. The 5 divine emperors also looked murderous as they stared at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing successfully saved Wuxuang and no longer had any worries. He laughed contemptuously. "Little bastard, you want to fight me? You're too naive. You dare to use my daughter to threaten me? You must be tired of living." As he spoke, he took out the sword of burial of heaven and released a murderous aura that soared to the sky. There was no need to hold back anymore. He only needed to release his anger and murderous intent to his heart's content. Such a drastic change caused the fifth prince to frown and sneer. "Ha ha! You used a divine weapon to save your daughter while I was unprepared. Do you think you've won just like that? Don't get carried away. You are alone, while this king has 5 high-level divine lords and 400 elite experts. You and your daughter still have to die. Moreover, I'm going to tear you and your daughter into pieces and grind your bones to dust." As soon as the fifth prince finished speaking, Ji Tianxing couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense and attacked with all his might. "Sword of Daytime!" he shouted coldly as he held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and stabbed with all his might. Instantly, the tip of the sword emitted a dazzling golden light that instantly expanded to a radius of 1,000 feet and filled the entire palace. Kaboom! With an earth-shattering explosion, the huge palace collapsed on the spot, splashing out billions of brick fragments. A blazing golden sun emerged from the ruins and rose into the sky, illuminating the entire West Wind town. With the ruins as the center, the destructive sword energy spread out and engulfed more than half of West Wind town. The next moment, the ground within a radius of dozens of miles shook as if a super earthquake had occurred. Hundreds of palaces and mansions were smashed into pieces by the sword energy. The entire West Wind town was reduced to ruins. Chapter 3022. The moment Ji Tianxing attacked, it was an all-out sword Dao ultimate technique. The power of this sword was truly terrifyingly powerful. Not only did it turn West Wind town into ruins, it also injured more than a dozen low-level divine lords and more than 20 elite experts. However, the fifth prince and the 5 high-level divine lords were fine. When Ji Tianxing attacked, everyone realized that something was wrong and immediately cast spells to block, joining forces to protect the fifth prince. Even so, the incomparably violent impact still sent the fifth prince and the 5 high-level divine lords flying back more than 10 miles. The 6 of them drew an arc in the sky and fell into the messy ruins. After that, Ji Tianxing flew high into the sky and stood there, overlooking the ruins. Seeing the confused and fearful expressions on the faces of the lower divine lords and elite experts around him, the corners of his mouth curled up in a cold and sinister smile. The fifth prince and the 5 high-level divine lords also flew out of the ruins and stood high in the sky. They faced off against Ji Tianxing across the sky, tens of thousands of feet away. "Little bastard. You're really courting death. This king originally wanted to let you live a little longer, but I didn't expect you to be so eager to die. Then this king will fulfill your wish." As he spoke, the fifth prince took out a dark golden divine sword and held it firmly in his hand. The black-robed, white-haired divine lord also stretched out his palms, his 10 fingers filled with dazzling 5-colored divine flames, his entire body bursting with a violent aura. He angrily glared at Ji Tianxing and coldly shouted, "Little bastard, you dare to attack hundreds of us alone? This is not confidence or courage, but arrogance and ignorance. This old man will immediately let you experience what it means to live a life worse than death." Ji Tianxing looked at the crowd with a cold smile and said, "I'm alone? Ha ha ha. To tell you the truth, I came here today to kill all of you. Not a single one will be left alive." As his voice fell, he opened the 3rd level of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Streaks of white light appeared in the sky one after another, continuing to appear without end. In a short 2 breaths, the third prince and many experts of the Imperial Guard appeared in the sky. A total of 63 people lined up neatly in the sky, forming a formation. Previously, they had been waiting patiently in the darkness on the 3rd level of the Divine Pagoda. At this moment, they could finally show themselves. All of them were clad in armor and wielding swords, emanating murderous aura. The 5th prince and many divine emperors were dumbfounded when they saw the 3rd prince and the Imperial Guards appear out of nowhere. "It's you, 3rd Imperial brother, and the Imperial Guards. You, how did you? This is impossible. Didn't you all return to the palace to rest? Our spies have been monitoring him all the way. They clearly saw him alone. How could this be? How did you do it?" Everyone's expression changed drastically. They were both shocked and in disbelief. At the same time, a trace of worry appeared in his heart. The third prince was also wearing a golden armor and holding a broad heavy sword. He angrily shouted with a dignified voice, "Old Five, you sent people to break into Changfeng courtyard and openly robbed my guests. How dare you? You're openly challenging the laws of the kingdom of God. You even used young Master Tianhong's daughter as a hostage to ambush him with a large army. This is even more sinister and despicable. Do you still have the demeanor of a royal child? You don't deserve to be a prince of the kingdom of God, let alone the crown prince. I'm ashamed to be your brother." The third prince angrily rebuked the fifth prince with a righteous attitude. At least in terms of momentum, he completely had the upper hand. The fifth prince was extremely angry. He gritted his teeth and sneered, "Old Three, you actually went against your brother for this little bastard. How can you be worthy of father's cultivation? Winner takes all. What qualifications do you have to criticize me? Even if you're not convinced, father will appoint me as the crown prince. Your good days are over. Now think about how to curry favor with me so that you can keep your family business." Ha ha ha, what a joke. The third prince looked up to the sky and laughed, full of disdain. "Father hasn't announced the edict yet, and you really think of yourself as the crown prince? You're so despicable and arrogant. You don't care about the laws of the kingdom of God and the face of the royal family. What qualifications do you have to be the crown prince? Now, as the governor of the imperial guards, I'm going to arrest you, a villain who has no regard for the law, and let father decide your crime." After that, the third prince looked at the Sir Gods with a dignified gaze and shouted, "The imperial guards are on duty to arrest criminals. Whoever dares to disobey will be sentenced to death." The Sir Gods and experts under the fifth prince's command suddenly looked worried, hesitant and fearful. The imperial guards were the king's sword, representing the dignity of the king and the kingdom of God. The crowd was also worried. What if this matter was blown out of proportion and they really wanted to pursue the matter? They worked for the fifth prince for a reason and for benefits. No one wanted to implicate their entire family. The fifth prince saw the strange look on the crowd's face and quickly sneered, "Old Three, don't you use the king's authority to intimidate others. The imperial guards are father's guards. You used them without permission to help Tianxing settle his personal grudge. This is a heinous crime. Moreover, this is not King City. What qualifications do you have to arrest people?" Hearing his words, the Sir Gods and experts were a little relieved and regained their confidence. The third prince frowned and wanted to argue a little more. Ji Tianxing had lost his patience and a look of disappointment flashed across his eyes. Before the operation, the third prince was extremely angry and looked like he was going to start a massacre regardless of anything. I didn't expect that he was just putting on a show in front of me. Now that they are confronting the fifth prince, they seem to be quarreling fiercely and look like they are going to kill each other if they disagree. But in fact, these two princes are only quarreling and don't want to kill each other. Although the two princes acted very realistically, how could they fool Ji Tianxing? He could see that the two princes had scruples and didn't dare to kill each other. The imperial guards were the third prince's trump card. The Sir Gods and experts around them were probably the fifth prince's trump card too. Both of them didn't want to waste each other's strength here, in case the second prince took advantage of them. But how could this work? What Ji Tianxing wanted was to engage in a chaotic battle and start a massacre. Therefore, while the two princes were arguing, he secretly used his poison divine power and released 9 invisible poisons. Under his precise control, the 9 poisons quietly spread among the Sir Gods and experts. But the third prince and the imperial guards beside him weren't affected. After releasing the poisons, Ji Tianxing waved the burial of heaven and charged at the few Sir Gods not far away with a thunderous force. They were 8 low-level Sir Gods. They were all holding Kenshin weapons and were ready to attack. They hadn't received the fifth prince's order to attack and didn't dare to act without permission. They also didn't expect Ji Tianxing to suddenly attack. Sun-shattering sword. The burial of heaven waved the sword and instantly slashed out 18 5-colored sword beams. They carried more than 60 nomological powers and enveloped the 9 Sir Gods. Chapter 3023. Bam! 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 A series of muffled sounds exploded in the sky. The 9 lesser divine lords had no time to dodge and were sliced into several pieces by the sword light. Blood splattered and severed limbs flew everywhere. In the blink of an eye, 6 of the 9 lesser divine lords were killed by Ji Tianxing. The remaining 3 divine lords, whose godheads were still intact, flew out of their corpses in a panic and retreated into the distance. But the moment the 3 godheads appeared, Ji Tianxing swung his sword and sliced them into pieces. Catcher! Catcher! With a crisp shattering sound, the 3 godheads fell apart and scattered into dozens of pieces. The 9 lesser divine lords died on the spot. Both the 5th prince and the 3rd prince were stunned by the sudden change. The 2 of them didn't expect Ji Tianxing to be so hot-tempered. He didn't care about the consequences at all and directly attacked. This guy was simply lawless. Seeing that Ji Tianxing did not stop, he brandished his sword and attacked the other divine lords. The 5th prince finally came to his senses and quickly ordered loudly, "Kill them, kill him and chop him into pieces." At this juncture, he could not care about the consequences. If he did not fight back, more of the divine lords under his command would be slaughtered by Ji Tianxing. After receiving the 5th prince's order, the 300 experts shouted loudly and launched a siege with murderous intent. "Kill! Kill Tianxing and His Highness will reward you handsomely." As the roars rang out, the 300 experts waved their Kenshin weapons wildly and released sword light and sword shadows that blotted out the sky. Ji Tianxing was fearless and immediately used the celestial dragon overlord body to transform into a 1,000 feet tall golden armored god of war and launched a counterattack. No matter how gloomy and unwilling the 3rd prince was, he could only order the imperial guards to fight with all their might under such circumstances. After all, there were more than 300 people on the other side and the divine skill light and shadows that filled the sky covered dozens of miles. If the imperial guards did not fight back, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Moreover, they were in the middle of the enemy's encirclement and had no way to escape. If he wanted to survive, he could only fight back. In the next moment, the divine abilities and secret techniques used by both sides collided fiercely in the sky, causing an earth-shattering explosion. Boom boom boom! Bang 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 bang! The deafening sound waves reverberated in the sky, spreading to a radius of 1,000 miles. Countless saber lights, sword shadows, and images of divine arts all shattered, exploding into billions of fragments of divine light. Violent and devastating shockwaves spread out in all directions. The ruined West Wind town immediately disappeared without a trace. Even the ground was dug hundreds of feet deep. In the first round of confrontation between the 2 sides, there were already severe casualties. Of the 300 enlightened masters under the 5th prince's command, dozens were killed, and more than 80 were seriously injured. Those people were either struck by the shockwaves or by the remnants of the divine abilities. Otherwise, he would be blasted into smithereens, and even his godhead would be shattered. Either their bodies were destroyed, their godheads were severely damaged, and they fled into the distance on their last breaths. After all, a battlefield where over 100 divine lord powerhouses were killing each other was not something that they could participate in. Not to mention injuring the divine lord powerhouses, if they were caught in the flames of battle, they would become cannon fodder. In addition, of the 90 divine lords under the 5th prince, 8 of them were seriously injured and almost died. That was Ji Tianxing's doing. Seeing that the upper divine lords were protecting the 5th prince, he did not attack him, but turned to kill the lower divine lords. Because the difference in numbers between the 2 sides was too great. He had to eliminate the divine lords under the 5th prince's command as quickly as possible. As for the 3rd prince and the many imperial guards, the casualties were not too bad. Needless to say, the 3rd prince was basically safe. The other side's experts did not dare to kill him, lest they bear the crime of murdering the prince and be chased to the ends of the earth by the bloodfire divine country. Therefore, the experts under the 5th prince could only besiege Ji Tianxing and the imperial guards. However, Ji Tianxing was very powerful and it was difficult to track him. As for the 60 imperial guards and the 2 commanders, they were all powerful and well-equipped elites. After the first round of battle, only 5 imperial guards were killed and 12 were injured. Both sides paused their attacks. The 200 or so Empyrean gods under the 5th prince's command all fled in fear. The two upper divine lords covered the fifth prince and took the opportunity to retreat to the edge of the battlefield. This was the crown prince of the divine country, the future monarch. How could he stay in the middle of a chaotic battle? The other three upper divine lords quickly commanded the 80 lower divine lords to form a battle formation in the sky. The third prince also took the opportunity to command the imperial guards to change to another defensive battle formation. He did not hope to kill many people, only to reduce the number of casualties. These 50 or so imperial guards were his treasures. His heart would ache if any of them died. If more than half of them died, he would really want to cry, but no tears would come out. However, while the two sides were adjusting their battle formations, Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to stir up trouble again. He used the dragon elephant divine fist with his left hand and attacked the lower divine lords in the east. His right hand waved the burial of heaven sword and released hundreds of lightning sword lights that enveloped dozens of divine lords. Boom! 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 The mountain-sized dragon elephant divine fist struck 6 lower divine lords with a loud bang. The 6 of them were smashed into meat paste and their godheads were also severely damaged. They had lost the ability to fight and fled into the distance in a panic. The 30 or so divine lords were also killed by the hundreds of lightning sword lights and turned into a rain of blood and flesh. They did not even manage to protect their godheads and died on the spot. At the edge of the battlefield, the fifth prince saw this scene and was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Damned beast! You will die a horrible death. Kill him. Everyone, surround him and kill him for this prince. The fifth prince roared at the top of his lungs, his eyes red with anger. No one knew that the reason he was so angry was not because he was grieving for those experts who had died. It was because half of the divine lords and elite experts had been lent to him by that faction. If one more person died today, he would have to pay an even higher price to become the monarch in the future. That faction had not helped him for free. Many divine lords received the order and immediately used their ultimate killing moves to surround Ji Tianxing. Hundreds of glowing saber lights and sword shadows, which blotted out the sun, fell from the sky and bombarded Ji Tianxing. What was worse was that the fifth prince even shouted at the third prince, "Third brother, as long as you retreat with the imperial guards, our grudge will be written off. Don't interfere in this matter and this prince will owe you a favor." How arrogant was the fifth prince before? Now, he had taken the initiative to beg for peace and lowered his head to the third prince. It was obvious that he was really desperate. Of course, it was also obvious that his hatred for Ji Tianxing was bone deep. The third prince hesitated for a moment and was struggling in his heart. However, he immediately came to his senses and shouted righteously, "Fifth prince, this prince is enforcing the law impartially. Don't make a mistake. It's not too late to stop now." He knew very well that the fifth prince's words could not be trusted. If he really took the imperial guards away and allowed the fifth prince to kill Ji Tianxing, he would have no hope of fighting for the throne. Chapter 30-24. Stop. I will teach you a lesson. The fifth prince was so angry that he almost vomited blood as he cursed with a livid expression. Everyone was taking revenge for personal grudges and using public resources for private purposes. They had a tacit understanding. At this juncture, the third prince still had to pretend to be righteous. This made the fifth prince so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Seeing that the negotiation was not going to work, he could only order those Sir Gods to kill Ji Tianxing at all costs. Boom! 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 Divine arts that blotted out the sky suddenly engulfed Ji Tianxing. However, most of the divine arts attacks were blocked by the Imperial Guard's battle formation. A small number of blade lights and sword shadows hit Ji Tianxing, but they were either neutralized by him or blocked by him. He was pushed back 10,000 feet and only suffered some light injuries. This was not a big deal. He pounced toward another group of Sir Gods with murderous intent. Heavenly Dragon World / Sect returning swords. Ji Tianxing's fighting spirit was high. He exploded with his peak fighting strength and madly executed his sword Dao divine arts. At this moment, his fighting strength was comparable to a Sir God who had just reached the 8th degree realm. He was really invincible. Once those low-level Sir Gods were hit by his sword Dao divine arts, if they did not die, they would be seriously injured. As for the third prince and the Imperial Guards, not only did they form a formation to block the attacks, they also frequently helped Ji Tianxing out. This made Ji Tianxing kill to his heart's content as he wantonly slaughtered the Sir Gods under the fifth prince. Very quickly, 30 breaths passed. There were only about 50 low-level Sir Gods under the fifth prince and half of them were injured. Not long after the battle began, he had lost 50 low-level Sir Gods. Most of them were killed by Ji Tianxing. Only a dozen or so were killed by the Imperial Guards. This made the fifth prince so depressed that he vomited blood. He wished that he could personally go up and tear Ji Tianxing into pieces. However, 2 high-level Sir Gods kept protecting him and were determined not to let him go up. Helpless, the fifth prince could only order the 3 high-level Sir Gods to attack Ji Tianxing with all their might. They had to hold him back and stop him from wantonly slaughtering. Upon receiving the order, the 3 high-level divine lords charged towards Ji Tianxing without a care in the world, joining forces to besiege him. The 3 of them cooperated with each other very well. Their methods were sinister and ruthless. They used all kinds of divine abilities and absolute arts at their fingertips. They were veteran Sir Gods who had gone through thousands of battles. No matter how strong Ji Tianxing was, being entangled by the 3 of them, he wouldn't be able to escape in a short time. Moreover, there were still dozens of lower divine lords who were constantly casting spells to sneak attack him. Ji Tianxing immediately fell into a disadvantageous position. He was beaten back repeatedly by the 3 high-level divine lords and was exhausted from defending himself. However, he had been retreating to the edge of the battlefield. He was not seriously injured and was still in peak condition. Seeing him getting closer and closer to the fifth prince finally realized that something was wrong. What does this little bastard want to do? Escape? No. Is he trying to assassinate me? The fifth prince suddenly guessed the answer. He narrowed his eyes and grinned. I am the crown prince. How dare he assassinate me? What a lawless person. At the same time, he sent a voice transmission to the 2 high-level divine lords beside him. Kang Yang, Bai Zhu, take this opportunity to kill him. Kang Yang was the black-robed, white-haired old man. He was the strongest of the 5 high-level divine lords. Bai Zhu was a middle-aged man who was as thin as a bamboo pole. His skin was as white as paper and he knew more than 20 evil divine abilities. These 2 were the fifth prince's most trusted aides. Therefore, they would rather not participate in the battle and stay close to the fifth prince to protect him. However, Ji Tianxing was closing in on them, intending to assassinate the fifth prince. They no longer hesitated and stepped forward to stand in front of the fifth prince. While protecting the fifth prince, they stared at Ji Tianxing, ready to strike at any time. Ji Tianxing and the 3 high-level divine lords fought for more than 20 moves. Finally, he retreated to the edge of the battlefield, only 10,000 feet away from the fifth prince. He used a sword Dao divine ability to force the 3 high-level divine lords back. Then, he took the opportunity to use a divine ability secret art to assassinate the fifth prince. Sword piercing the 9 heavens. Suddenly, his body glowed with golden light, as dazzling as the sun. He held the huge sword of burial of heaven with both hands and unleashed 120% of his strength, slashing out a 1,000-foot-long sword. The huge sword was golden and dazzling, as if it was real. It contained a divine might that could destroy heaven and earth. More than 60 kinds of divine patterns could be seen on the huge sword blade, as if they contained the truths of the great Tao. Before the sword light arrived, the terrifying slaughter sword intent had already suppressed Kang Yang, Bai Zhu, and the fifth prince. The 3 of them looked serious and shocked as they used all their strength to block the attack. 9 Flames Dragon. Kang Yang waved his palms and unleashed 9 colored divine flames, forming a long dragon of flames to block the huge sword's attack. Vanishing Illusion. Bai Zhu stretched out his pale hands and released black and white divine power, forming a huge roulette in front of the 3. Even the fifth prince took out an ancient bronze chessboard to block in front of him. Kaboom! The huge sword finally slashed down, instantly severing the long dragon of flames. Then, the black and white roulette was also cut in half by the huge sword. Bam! In the end, the huge sword, which had been weakened by 40%, struck the ancient bronze chessboard with an earth-shattering boom. The ancient bronze chessboard trembled violently. The fifth prince's face turned pale as he was sent flying. While he was still in midair, he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. Clearly, he had been injured by the sword. His internal organs and meridians had all been damaged. However, the ancient bronze chessboard's defense was very strong. It was not cut in half, and he managed to survive. Ji Tianxing had wanted to take advantage of the situation to pursue and kill the fifth prince, but Kang Yang and Bai Zhu had risked their lives to protect the fifth prince. The other three high-level divine lords also took the opportunity to attack him fiercely. Ji Tianxing had no choice but to give up on assassinating the fifth prince and turn around to deal with the three high-level divine lords. This time, he was no longer suppressed by the three of them like before. He suddenly became fierce, and his fighting strength increased twofold. The three high-level divine lords found it difficult to deal with him. Heaven-piercing sword, heaven-splitting sword, God-slaying sword, burial of heaven. He used all sorts of sword Dao abilities one after the other, filling the sky with sword light. Invisible sword intent suppressed the three high-level divine lords, making them feel uneasy and fearful. After 10 some moves, a high-level divine lord's legs were severed, and he screamed as he fell into the rubble. After another 20 moves, a second high-level divine lord was cleaved in half, his blood spraying across the sky. This person's body was destroyed, and the two halves of his corpse fell into the rubble. The godhead hurriedly fled from Westwind Town, vanishing into the horizon. The remaining two high-level divine lords were attacking Ji Tianxing, and one of them had even been heavily injured. This greatly reduced the pressure on Ji Tianxing, and he was able to handle the situation with greater ease. While dealing with two high-level divine lords, he could also find time to kill those celestial gods who were trembling in fear and hiding in the distance. The fifth prince's heart was burning with worry. He ordered the 40-some low-level divine lords to work together to kill Ji Tianxing. But the third prince and the imperial guards were doing their best to block the attacks and protect Ji Tianxing with all their strength. The fifth prince was completely anxious, so he had Kang Yang and Bai Zhu join the battle. Chapter 30-25. Kang Yang and Bai Zhu joined the battle and attacked Ji Tianxing together with the other two high divine lords. The pressure on Ji Tianxing suddenly increased and his attacks slowed down. It was even harder for him to gain the upper hand, and he had to defend himself and counterattack. Kang Yang and Bai Zhu had not participated in the battle and were in their peak condition. The moment they attacked, they used all kinds of ultimate moves and their attacks were very fierce. However, their aura was like a drum of energy, then weakened and exhausted. After 100 breaths of time, Ji Tianxing blocked and neutralized all their ultimate moves. Their attacks also slowed down, and the power of their attacks decreased a little. Only now did the battle stabilize and become peaceful. The strength of the two high divine lords was even weaker, especially the guy who had both his legs chopped off. He was already somewhat exhausted. Even Kang Yang and Bai Zhu had used up a lot of their divine power. The pressure on Ji Tianxing was greatly reduced and he could easily deal with the attacks of the four people. Not far away, the 40-odd lower divine lords and the 50-odd imperial guards were also gradually deciding who was better. The third prince and the two imperial guards commanders were all 7th heaven realm high divine lords. The 50 imperial guards were slightly stronger than the low divine lords in terms of equipment and strength. Therefore, the imperial guards had a great advantage. Their battle formation was unbreakable and no matter how the low divine lords attacked, they could firmly block and neutralize them. As a result, the low divine lords could not threaten Ji Tianxing at all. However, even though the third prince and the imperial guards had the advantage, they did not take the initiative to attack and kill. They did not want to achieve anything, only to avoid mistakes. The third prince did not want to annihilate the low divine lords and obtain victory. He only wanted to block the attacks of the high divine lords and protect Ji Tianxing. When the stalemate reached the end, he would negotiate with the fifth prince and save Ji Tianxing. That would be the end of his mission. The stalemate continued and the battle did not stop. The fifth prince became more and more anxious and he could not help but attack Ji Tianxing from afar several times. He understood that there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in this world. The fact that he had set up an ambush in West Wind Town and killed Ji Tianxing, there must be others who knew about it. If time dragged on for too long, it was inevitable that there would be variables. We can't go on like this. I have to think of a way to get rid of that brat as soon as possible. The fifth prince furrowed his brows and racked his brains for a countermeasure. However, right at this moment, a large expanse of colorful divine light flew over from the sky not far away. Swoosh! Swish, swish, swish. The dazzling divine light streaked across the sky and soon arrived at the valley. These people stopped at the edge of the battlefield and observed the situation. The people who came were not many, just 7, but they were all divine Lord Realm powerhouses. Among them, there were 5 high-level godmonarchs and 2 middle-level godmonarchs of the 6th stage. The leader was a burly man wearing a golden python robe and a golden crown. This person had a dignified appearance. He had a pair of large eyes, white hair, and a goatee on his chin. It was the second prince. The 4 high-level godmonarchs behind him were the chief of staff, Yang Long, a hunchbacked old man, and 2 generals wearing golden armor. As for the 2 middle-level godmonarchs, they stood at the very back and did not attract much attention. The second prince's arrival caused Ji Tianxing, the third prince, and the 5th prince to reveal looks of surprise and complicated expressions. The 5th prince's gaze turned even more solemn and his expression turned even uglier. The 3rd prince was stunned and subconsciously asked, "Second royal brother, what are you doing here? How did you find this place?" Only Ji Tianxing's reaction was very calm, as if he had long expected this result. The second prince stroked his beard, his expression dignified and his tone heavy as he said, "Old third, don't forget that this prince has control of the Divine Kingdom's largest information and intelligence organization. To put it immodestly, nothing that happens in Royal City can escape this prince's eyes and ears. What happened last night, this prince already knows. Old third, both of us have underestimated Old Fifth's methods. He is unremarkable when he doesn't make a sound, but when he does, he amazes everyone. In order to deal with young Master Tianxing, he actually used such a sinister and despicable move. This is really impressive." The second prince had a cold smile on his face and his tone was contemptuous and mocking. The 5th prince's face instantly became even longer. His gaze was cold as he shouted, "Old second, what are you trying to do?" The 3rd prince had brought the imperial guards to help Ji Tianxing and had already ruined his plan. Now that the second prince had also come to join in the fun, how could he not be angry? The second prince said with a smile, "Little 5th, young Master Tianxing is this prince's friend and his daughter is this prince's niece. Miss Wushuang is so smart and cute, this prince can't wait to dote on her. How can you do such a sinister and shameless thing? This is an insult to the ancestors of the royal family. This prince came today to rescue this prince's friend, young Master Tianxing, and this prince's little niece. If you dare to stop me, don't blame this prince for being impolite." Hearing this, the 3rd prince sneered in his heart. The 5th prince was so angry that he gritted his teeth. "Second brother, you're the most shameless bastard of all. What relationship do you have with Tianxing?" Everyone was well aware of this. "Stop putting on an act here, you are just using this opportunity to target this prince." Since the truth had been exposed, the second prince was not angry. He smiled without changing his expression and said, "Yes, you guessed right, little 5th. But so what? This prince wants to take this opportunity to teach you a lesson and let you know that seniority is important. Don't be so complacent." After that, he stopped smiling and scolded sternly, "Little 5th, let young Master Tianxing go immediately and this prince will let bygones be bygones." The 5th prince did not expect that this second prince would openly fall out with him. He did not want to hide his embarrassment anymore. In his extreme anger, he sneered and said, "You want this prince to let him go? Dream on. What are you going to do?" The second prince stretched out his right hand and took out a magical sword embedded with 3 gems. He said with a murderous look, "Then this prince will have no choice but to snatch him. Furthermore, this bunch of lackeys of yours, none of them can think about leaving alive." When his voice faded, the second prince waved his sword and gave the order to attack. Those 6 Divine Lord powerhouses unsheathed their Kenshin weapons without hesitation and attacked the 5th Prince's people. 4 high-level Divine Lords rushed toward those dozens of low-level Divine Lords, while the 2 middle-level Divine Lords massacred the celestial deity powerhouses around the battlefield. The moment the great battle started, divine light immediately exploded in the field. A loud noise shook the heavens. In less than 10 breaths of time, more than 30 of those celestial deity powerhouses were killed. The 100+ lucky survivors were horrified, hurriedly turning around and fleeing. This time, they ignored the 3rd Prince's orders and really fled at the last minute. They spread out and fled in all directions. Very soon, they left the valley and disappeared without a trace. Those 2 middle-level Divine Lords did not give chase either. They turned around and charged toward that group of low-level Divine Lords. The 2nd Prince did not make a move. He just stood in the air and gave orders. The 6 Divine Lords under his command were not as fearful as the Imperial Guards. They all charged and killed with unparalleled bravery. More than 40 low-level Divine Lords were immediately met with a calamity of annihilation. Large numbers of casualties appeared within a short time. Seeing this scene, the 3rd Prince was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Chapter 30:26. When the 2nd Prince arrived at Westwind Town and sent experts to join the battle, the scales of victory had already tipped toward Ji Tianxing. The 3rd Prince had originally brought 300 heavenly gods with him. More than 100 of them had been killed, and the remaining 120 had fled without a trace. Only 40 or so lower Divine Lords and 4 higher Divine Lords were still bitterly holding on. The fierce battle continued for another 100 breaths of time. At this time, the 6 lower Divine Lords under the 2nd Prince's command had already killed or severely injured more than a dozen lower Divine Lords. In addition, the 3rd Prince and the Imperial Guards continued to attack and suppress the remaining lower Divine Lords. As a result, the remaining 30 or so lower Divine Lords fell into a desperate situation of life and death. If the battle continued, they would all die. The 5th Prince had expected this and was as worried as ants on a hot pan. Not long after, Ji Tianxing found an opportunity to hack the monarch god whose legs had been chopped off into pieces with his sword. This person was lucky enough to survive, but his godhead was severely injured and he fled the battlefield in a panic. Ji Tianxing wanted to chase after him, but Kang Yang, Bai Zhu, and the other god lord hurriedly stopped him. It looked like the 5th Prince's plan was about to fail. He could not help but swing his divine sword and personally attack Ji Tianxing. But at this moment, something unexpected happened. The 30 or so lower Divine Lords had already expended a large amount of divine power, and many of them were severely injured. Their bodies were drenched in blood. Suddenly, someone's face turned pitch black and black blood spurted out of his orifices as he let out a shrill scream. There were also people who coughed up blood and fell to the ground, twitching and spasming. At first, only 3 people were in such a state. But soon, one lower Divine Lord after another's body turned black and blood spurted out of their orifices as they fell to the ground. This symptom spread like a virus and quickly spread through the crowd. PFFF, ugh, ooh ah. All kinds of blood spurting, blood vomiting, and miserable screams erupted in the sky, rising and falling one after another. There was no need for the 2nd Prince or the 3rd Prince to do anything. The 30 or so lower Divine Lords quickly lost their ability to fight. Everyone fell into the ruins, howling miserably in pain. They rolled on the ground, and large amounts of blood flowed out of their bodies. This sudden and unexpected event caused everyone to stop fighting, and they revealed expressions of astonishment and bewilderment. Everyone's gazes were gathered on those lower Divine Lords, unable to make sense of the situation. Only Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to attack Kang Yang, Bai Zhu, and the others. A cold sneer flashed across his eyes. It's been half an hour since the start of the battle, and the poison has only erupted now. It's really well hidden. Without a doubt, those lower Divine Lords were all poisoned. Previously, Ji Tianxing had opened the 3rd floor of the Divine Pagoda and released the 3rd Prince and the many Imperial Guards. He had originally thought that everyone would fight to the death. However, the 3rd Prince was afraid of the 5th Prince. He even argued with the 5th Prince, dilly-dallying, and didn't want to fight. Thus, Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to release the 9 invisible poisons. In order to not alert the other party, he hid the poisons very well and spread them out silently. It wasn't just the lower divine lords. The 200 or so heavenly gods were also invisibly corroded by the poisons. However, the poisons had concealed themselves for a long time. After half an hour, the lower divine lords had exhausted more than half of their strength. Only then did the poison suddenly erupt. Although the poison had erupted a little late. However, its power was astonishingly terrifying. Once it erupted, there was no saving them. They would die without a doubt. Before long, those lower divine lords lying in the ruins, howling and rolling on the ground, had turned into pools of blood and died on the spot. Even their godheads had been corroded to pieces and scattered among the ruins. They were completely and utterly dead. 1, 2, 3. The lower divine lords on the ground were disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye, leaving behind only pools of blood. Such a horrifying scene made everyone's scalps go numb. This was especially so for the imperial guards. They all revealed looks of dread as they discussed amongst themselves through telepathy. The third prince was also very puzzled, not understanding what was going on. Only the second prince carefully observed the reactions of those lower divine lords. After frowning and pondering for a moment, he came to a realization. He suddenly understood the reason. Turning his head to look at Ji Tianxing, he gave him a deep look. His lips moved soundlessly, and he mouthed 2 words, impressive. No one knew when Ji Tianxing had poisoned them. Even those lower divine lords didn't know that they had been poisoned. This kind of invisible poisoning method that took lives indeed made people tremble with fear. The 5th prince was dumbfounded. Seeing the elite experts under his command rapidly decomposing into pools of blood, he was so furious that he almost exploded. At the same time, his heart was filled with fear. The result he didn't want to see the most had finally happened. It's poison. They've been poisoned. The 5th prince finally reacted, his voice hoarse as he roared. He watched as the last lower divine lord also turned into pools of blood amidst a miserable howl, completely dead. The 5th prince suddenly turned around, his eyes bloodshot as he glared at Ji Tianxing. He roared at the top of his lungs, "It's you, you bastard. You actually poisoned them." At this moment, it was meaningless for him to say that Ji Tianxing was bloodthirsty, savage, and cruel. Previously, he himself had said that the winner was king, and the loser was a bandit. Everything depended on strength and methods. His skills were inferior, and he had lost dozens of lower divine lords for nothing. It was not an unjust loss. However, he hadn't been able to kill Ji Tianxing and had even suffered such terrible losses. It could be said that he had completely collapsed. The remaining confidants under his command, as well as the experts that the faction had lent him, were practically all dead. Even if he became the crown prince in the future and ascended to the throne as monarch, he would still have to compensate for the huge losses. He would also be blackmailed into signing all sorts of humiliating agreements, betraying the interests of the royal family and the blood-flame divine kingdom. He would definitely become the most humiliated monarch. When he thought of this, his vision turned black, and he felt the world spin. But this was just the beginning of a nightmare. Ji Tianxing stared at him, the corners of his mouth curled into a mocking sneer. He nodded and said, "That's right, I poisoned them before the battle began. Not only them, but those heavenly gods who escaped should also be dead by now. Oh right, there's also the 4 of you. The poison should have taken effect by now." As soon as he finished speaking, the expressions of Kang Yang, Bai Zhu, the 5th prince, and the red-robed divine lord changed drastically. The 4 of them trembled, their eyes filled with deep fear. The 5th prince, in particular, suffered the greatest psychological blow. His blood was already flowing in the opposite direction, and his vision had turned black. When he heard this news, his internal organs immediately churned, and he vomited a mouthful of black blood. Pfff, an arrow of blood shot more than 10 feet into the air, drawing an arc in the sky and sprinkling on the red-robed divine lord. Your Highness, Kang Yang, Bai Zhu, and the other 2 immediately let out anxious and concerned cries. Chapter 30:27. As expected, the 5th prince was poisoned. His entire face had turned black, and his veins were bulging. Black blood was flowing out of his 7 orifices. His internal organs had been corroded into black ashes, and they were mixed with blood as they spurted out of his mouth. He screamed in pain, holding his head with both hands and letting out a muffled roar. Kang Yang, Bai Zhu, and the red-robed divine emperor were dumbfounded. They could not understand. The 5th prince did not participate in the battle, nor did he consume much of his divine power. Even his cultivation realm was on par with theirs, not much different from theirs. Why did the 5th prince's poison break out before the poison in their bodies did? Could it be that the poison's effect was related to one's rage level? After all, the 5th prince had been humiliated and humiliated repeatedly. He was in a rage. Just as this thought flashed through their minds, the poison in their bodies took effect one after another. The red-robed divine emperor's injuries were even more serious. He could not hold on any longer and spat out black blood. Immediately after, Bai Zhu's body trembled like a sieve. His internal organs were burning as he fell to the ground, twitching non-stop. Kang Yang was the strongest. He lasted a few breaths longer than the other 2 before black blood gushed out of his mouth and nose. This time, the 5th prince's men were completely wiped out. The battle had already stopped. The 2nd prince and the 3rd prince's men looked at this scene with complicated expressions. They felt a chill run down their spines. Everyone had a deeper understanding of Ji Tianxing's methods. They were even more in awe and fear. However, the 2nd prince and the 3rd prince's expressions were somewhat strange. They saw the 5th prince bleeding from his 7 orifices and howling in pain. Soon, he would turn into a pool of blood. The 3rd prince was filled with hesitation and struggle. He thought to himself, no, 5th prince can't die yet. At least, he can't die here. Father has already appointed him as the crown prince. If he is poisoned to death by Tianxing, Father will definitely be furious. No matter what the reason is, Father will definitely kill Tianxing. Even 2nd brother and I will be implicated. We will definitely be severely punished by Father. Thinking of this, he wanted to persuade Ji Tianxing to save the poisoned 5th prince. As for the 2nd prince, he was gloating. There was a hint of anticipation in his complicated eyes. Ha ha ha, old 5th, oh old 5th, we thought you were scheming enough and would bring us a lot of trouble. I didn't expect that you still weren't Tianxing's match. You were poisoned by him and didn't have long to live. That's great. If you die, you won't be able to become the crown prince. This king has one less competitor. Next, I only need to defeat the 3rd prince and I will be able to seize the throne. Moreover, you were killed by Tianxing. It has nothing to do with this prince. For the sake of Scandinavia's reputation, Father would definitely execute Tianxing. As for this prince, at most, I will be punished by my father, but my life will not be in danger. This is really killing 2 birds with 1 stone. This prince really has to thank Tianxing. The 2nd prince hoped that the 5th prince would be poisoned to death as soon as possible and turn into a pool of blood. Then his wish would be fulfilled, and he wouldn't have to bear the crime. However, things didn't go as planned. The 5th prince howled in pain for a moment. Then, he suddenly took out a large number of divine pills and refined them. Then, he took out the bronze chessboard and a dark green cauldron. He released his divine power and activated these 2 divine artifacts. Suddenly, the bronze chessboard emitted a 5-colored light that protected his entire body. The dark green cauldron also released an endless amount of green light that entered his body and resisted the corrosion of the poison. These weren't enough. He took out a shining golden talisman and stuck it on the corroded hole in his chest. Suddenly, the mysterious golden talisman emitted an endless amount of golden light and formed a special protective layer in his body that firmly protected his heart and godhead. Even though his heart was poisoned and had a few holes in it, his organs were still damaged. The rest of his organs had already died and turned into black powder. However, he managed to survive with the 2 divine artifacts and the talisman. His physical body wasn't destroyed, and his godhead wasn't corroded by the poison. No matter how miserable his injuries were, at least his divine body and life were preserved. He could try to heal his injuries in the future. The 2nd prince and the 3rd prince's gazes were focused on the 5th prince. When they saw the mysterious golden talisman, they immediately frowned and revealed a look of surprise. Divine Talisman of Heaven Amplification, isn't that the talisman that Father bestowed upon him during the ceremony 50 years ago? Oh my God, that's a supreme-grade divine talisman, one of the most precious divine talismans of the royal family. With this divine talisman, it's like having an extra life. He was actually forced into such a state. You can imagine how terrifying the poison was. The two princes recognized that the golden divine talisman was bestowed upon the fifth prince by the king. At that time, the fifth prince was in charge of the divine blood ceremony and had put in a lot of effort for it. The ceremony went smoothly, and a few new faces appeared among the top 10 geniuses. This made the king very pleased, and he happily rewarded the fifth prince with a divine talisman of heaven amplification. He didn't expect that the fifth prince, who had kept it for 50 years, would have no choice but to use it today. With the protection of the two divine artifacts and the divine talisman of heaven amplification, the fifth prince's injuries were stabilized. The poison in his body was under control and didn't spread for the time being. His mind was much clearer than before. He stared at Ji Tianxing with his eyes wide open, then growled harshly, "Tianxing, you bastard. You're dead. No one in this world can save you. If I don't tear you to pieces, I swear I won't be a god." After swearing a vicious oath, he glanced at the second prince and the third prince and said hatefully, "You're really ruthless. You actually colluded with that bastard to kill me. I'll remember this. Just you wait." After saying that, the fifth prince turned to leave. The plan had completely failed, and the 400 experts and experts under his command had all been buried here. He had lost miserably, and there was nothing left for him to stay. He could only leave this place as soon as possible and go back to treat his injuries and get rid of the poison. Although Kang Yang and Bai Zhu were still howling in pain, they hadn't turned into blood yet. There was no doubt that they would die. The fifth prince fled alone, and he didn't think of bringing them along. At this time, Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven and blocked the fifth prince's path. He stared at the fifth prince and said in a cold voice, "Don't you think you're too naive to think you can leave here alive? From the moment you kidnapped my daughter, you were bound to die." The fifth prince was shocked and shouted with a ferocious expression, "You bastard. Do you really want to kill me? Are you crazy? Don't you know the consequences of killing me? No matter how capable you are, you can't bear the wrath of the entire blood-flame divine kingdom." He wasn't lying. No divine sovereign could bear the consequences of killing a divine sovereign. The third prince was also very anxious and quickly tried to dissuade him, "Young Master Tianxing, don't be rash. The fifth prince's subordinates are all dead, and he has also suffered such a miserable fate. You should vent your anger. Besides, didn't your daughter come back safe and sound? Why did you kill the fifth prince and become a fugitive?" Chapter 30:28. The third prince's words made sense. In his opinion, the fifth prince had already lost so miserably. And Ji Tianxing had won a complete victory, and his daughter Wu Shuang had been rescued safely. It was a perfect ending. Why did he have to kill the fifth prince himself? In that case, Ji Tianxing would become a deadly enemy of the Bloody Blaze Kingdom. If he didn't want to die, he could only flee to the end of the world. However, the third prince was someone who sought stability, and was even somewhat indecisive. He could never understand Ji Tianxing's state of mind. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "I said that I came here today not only to save Wu Shuang, but also to kill the fifth prince and all his lackeys. As for fleeing to the end of the world, the Bloody Blaze Kingdom is not my home. What's the loss of escaping from here?" The third prince was suddenly choked. He had a complicated expression, but he didn't know how to persuade him. The second prince had been silent, and his expression didn't change. In fact, he was inclined to kill, and he also hoped that Ji Tianxing would kill the fifth prince. That would be the best result for him. Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven tightly and slashed at the fifth prince with all his strength. The fifth prince's face suddenly turned ashen. While fleeing in a panic, he roared, "Second prince, third prince, if you sit and watch this lunatic kill me, my father will never forgive you." He was at the end of his rope, and he had become a commander without an army. If he wanted to live, He could only threaten the second prince and the third prince with morality. But the second prince was expressionless and pretended not to hear anything. The third prince wanted to stop him, but he didn't want to be enemies with Ji Tianxing, so he kept hesitating. Boom! The fifth prince was seriously injured and couldn't avoid the Sword of Burial of Heaven's attack. With a loud explosion, the Sword of Burial of Heaven slashed the ancient bronze chessboard. Instantly, the millstone-sized ancient bronze chessboard was split into two halves by the sword and was sent flying dozens of miles away. The fifth prince was also sent flying 30 miles and fell into the ruins. Ji Tianxing chased after the fifth prince again with his sword in hand. Once again, he swung his sword and slashed out two dazzling golden sword lights at the fifth prince. The fifth prince was so shocked that his soul almost left his body. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets. At this critical moment, he could only use the bronze furnace to protect himself. Clang! The Sword of Burial of Heaven fiercely slashed at the bronze pill furnace, causing another loud explosion. The cauldron trembled violently and flew for 20 miles before it finally stabilized. The fifth prince was not hit by the sword, but he was shocked to the point of spitting out blood. He looked even more dispirited. As the power of the bronze pill furnace weakened, the poison in his body could no longer be suppressed and began to spread again. Helpless, he hurriedly drew upon the power of the pill furnace to suppress the violent poison in his body. At this moment, Ji Tianxing caught up and slashed out a third time. Shua! A dazzling golden sword radiance, carrying an incomparably violent killing intent, suddenly slashed towards the fifth prince. The fifth prince was so weak that he did not have the strength to dodge. Just as he was about to be beheaded by the sword light, his head separated from his body. He felt that his time of death had come. His expression was one of fear, despair, and helplessness. The second prince's blood was boiling. He secretly clenched his fists, his heart filled with anticipation. The third prince, on the other hand, was nervous. His heart was in his throat, and he could not help but open his mouth to stop it. But at this moment, an angry roar suddenly exploded in the sky. A dazzling blood-red blade of light suddenly descended from the sky. How dare you assassinate the prince? You must be tired of living. As the powerful and mighty voice rang out, the blood-red blade of light that was hundreds of feet long collided with the dazzling golden sword radiance. Bang! In a deafening muffled sound, the sword radiance and the blood-red blade of light collapsed at the same time, exploding into fragments of sword radiance that filled the sky. The violent and devastating shockwave sent the bronze cauldron and the fifth prince flying. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing's sword radiance was blocked, and the fifth prince's life was saved. But unfortunately, the shockwave of the explosion wrapped around the sword radiance fragments and minced his body into a bloody mess. In particular, his two legs were actually minced into pieces by the sword radiance, leaving only a pale red divine bone. The fifth prince, who was already severely injured, could no longer bear the pain of losing his legs. His vision turned black and he fainted. The fifth prince and the bronze cauldron fell from the sky and were about to fall into the ruins. At this moment, a purple figure descended from the sky. He struck out a giant blood-red palm and caught the cauldron and the fifth prince, holding them in the palm of his hand. Ji Tianxing and the two princes' gazes immediately fell on the purple figure. It was a burly old man in a purple robe. His purple hair danced in the wind. He had a square face. His beard and eyebrows were already white. His eyes were as deep as the sea of stars, and his entire body exuded a domineering aura. When the second prince and the third prince saw the person's appearance clearly, they frowned fiercely and revealed a look of surprise. Ji Tianxing narrowed his eyes. His expression became vigilant and alert. "It's you." He recognized that this person was the purple-robed Sir God who ambushed him in the outskirts of Monarch City last night. At that time, he was only 3,000 miles away from Chengyang Courtyard when he was ambushed by 3 Sir Gods. The leader was the purple-robed, bronze-masked Sir God of the 8th Heaven Realm. Although the old man in front of him did not wear a mask and revealed his true face, his divine aura was definitely not weak. However, the aura of his divine power could not be wrong. Ji Tianxing was sure that it was him. The purple-robed old man glanced at him and sneered. "Ha ha! It's me. What do you want?" After that, the purple-robed old man ignored him. He carried the fifth prince in his arms and silently performed a spell to treat him. At the same time, another cold and majestic voice came from not far away. Where did this arrogant madman come from? How dare he? How dare he openly assassinate the Prince of Monarch Kingdom within the borders of Bloodflame Kingdom? I have traveled to all the kingdoms and have never seen such a ferocious person. Hearing this voice, Ji Tianxing and the two princes quickly looked to the south. They saw a handsome young man in a black brocade robe walking in the air. This person was from the great Yang God clan. He was close to 10 feet tall and had a head of red hair. He looked handsome and refined. He wore a beautiful and exquisite crown on his head. His belt and accessories were incomparably precious. Most importantly, the black brocade robe he wore was embroidered with 8 lifelike golden divine dragons. One look and one could tell that this refined young Sir God clan member had an extremely honorable status. Behind him, there were 4 high divine lords dressed in different attire. 2 of the Sir Gods had ugly and distorted faces. Their auras were also chaotic. It was obvious that they were severely injured. Both of them stared coldly at Ji Tianxing. Intense killing intent emanated from their bodies. Ji Tianxing sensed that something was amiss. He probed with his divine perception and discovered that the 2 Sir Gods had been poisoned. It's them. He instantly understood that the 2 ugly Sir Gods were the unlucky fellows who tried to kill him last night and were poisoned by him. At this moment, he finally understood the black-robed young man's identity. This person was the 5th prince's backer, the mastermind behind this plan. Chapter 3029. The unconscious 5th prince was saved by an 8th-level divine lord realm purple-robed elder. The black-robed youth had 4 divine lords with him, and his strength was unfathomable. It was impossible for Ji Tianxing to kill the 5th prince now. He frowned and stared coldly at the black-robed youth. Who are you? The black-robed youth raised his eyebrows and glanced at him with interest. You don't even know me. People like you, who are ignorant yet arrogant and despotic, have no idea what you're doing. I wonder how you managed to survive until today. The 2nd and 3rd princes bowed and cupped their hands at the black-robed youth. Greetings, Prince Lian. The 2 of them had respectful postures. Even the divine lord powerhouses and imperial guards under them bowed their heads with solemn expressions. This puzzled Ji Tianxing. Prince Lian? A prince of the Bloodflame Divine Kingdom? The king's brother? The uncles of the princes? No. Even if he's the king's elder brother, they wouldn't be so afraid. Prince Lian glanced at the 2 princes and said with a smile that was not a smile, You 2, well done. You actually colluded with outsiders to deal with your own brother. As expected of royalty, the contempt and sarcasm in his words were clear as day. After saying that, he ignored the 2 princes and hurriedly checked on the 5th prince's injuries. He frowned when he saw that the 5th prince was seriously injured and unconscious with poison surging in his body. What a vicious method! Prince Lian muttered with a grim expression. He took out a jade-green divine pill and catalyzed it with his divine power. Swoosh! The divine pill turned into a dark green stream of air and entered the 5th prince's body. Soon, the power of the pill formed a protective layer that protected the 5th prince's heart and godhead. The 5th prince was finally out of danger and his life was no longer in danger. At the same time, the dark green medicinal power swam in his body and kept devouring the poison. The 5th prince's symptoms eased a little and he slowly woke up. He saw Prince Lian the moment he opened his eyes. He hurriedly propped up his heavily injured body and bowed. Greetings, Prince Lian. I'm sorry that my plan failed and disappointed you. The 5th prince's attitude was very respectful, but there was also a trace of fear and worry. No one knew what he was afraid of and worried about. Prince Lian calmly raised his hand and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, it's just a small loss. Don't worry about it. Moreover, the other party had 3 forces working together. You didn't lose unjustly. However, you have to learn from this lesson. There was no perfect conspiracy or plan in this world. One had to make corresponding adjustments and changes according to the situation in order to be invincible. Most importantly, Only when one is strong enough can one ignore all schemes and schemes. The fifth prince listened carefully and pretended to be humble. He bowed and said, "Thank you for your advice, Prince Lian. I will remember it." "All right, you should go back and treat your injuries." Prince Lian waved his hand and turned to leave. However, the fifth prince was unwilling to give up. He subconsciously said, "But," Prince Lian turned to look at him and said expressionlessly, "What? Are you still not satisfied? You want me to kill that brat?" The fifth prince remained silent, tacitly agreeing with this idea. However, he knew that he was being rude and hurriedly apologized. "I was thinking too much. Please forgive me, Prince Lian." Prince Lian said indifferently, "You have to remember that when you have no trump cards but still refuse to give up and fight like a cornered beast, you have already lost." His meaning was clear and everyone present understood. Although Prince Lian was here, he only brought 5 high-level divine lords with him. 2 of the divine lords were heavily injured and poisoned. They did not have much fighting strength. Even if Prince Lian personally attacked, it would be difficult to kill Ji Tianxing. After all, Ji Tianxing had 7 high-level divine lords, 2 imperial army commanders, and more than 40 imperial army soldiers. Prince Lian's side had no chance of winning. If they really fought, the fifth prince would definitely die. 4 of the 5 divine lords would also die. Only that purple-robed elder could cover Prince Lian's escape. Therefore, Prince Lian would definitely not do such a stupid thing. Before leaving, Prince Lian took a deep look at Ji Tianxing. His eyes were deep and cold as he said in a playful tone, "Young man, there will be plenty of time in the future. You must live well. Don't die in the hands of others. I will be very disappointed." In other words, he was determined to take Ji Tianxing's life. Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said, "No matter who wants to kill me, they will all die under my sword in the end. There are no exceptions." Hearing this, Grand Prince Lian's pupils constricted, and a cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. The second prince looked at Ji Tianxing with interest and admiration. Only the third prince's expression changed slightly. He was filled with anxiety as he shook his head and sighed. Soon, Prince Lian left with the fifth prince and the rest, disappearing into the horizon. The ruins within a radius of 150 miles became silent. The third prince waved his hand and ordered 10 imperial army soldiers to clean up the battlefield and collect the spoils. The second prince brought Yang Long and the rest to Ji Tianxing and bowed before leaving. "Young Master Tianxing, now that the truth is out, I am cleared of suspicion. Fortunately, your daughter was successfully rescued and you are safe and sound. This prince is relieved." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and cupped his hands. "Thank you, second prince, for coming to help. I will remember this favor and will repay it in the future." The second prince smiled with satisfaction and felt that this trip was worthwhile. He nodded and said, "Young Master Tianxing, I admire you for being able to distinguish between kindness and hatred. Let's not talk too much. I have to return to Monarch City to deal with some matters, so I will leave first. By the way, you must be careful in the next few days. Watch out for Prince Lian." With that, he flew into the sky with the 4 monarchs and returned to Monarch City. The third prince stood side by side with Ji Tianxing and watched the second prince leave. He sighed with a bitter smile. "Sigh. Young Master Tianxing, you already have a death feud with Little Five. Why do you have to provoke Prince Lian? I understand that you don't want to lose your momentum and limelight. That's why you said those words to Prince Lian. However, those words are meaningless. In the end, you still have to submit to him." Ji Tianxing frowned and asked, "What's wrong? Is Prince Lian very powerful? So powerful that you're afraid of him?" These words hurt the third prince's pride. However, the third prince was not angry. He nodded without hesitation and said, "That's right. His power and status are on a completely different level from ours. Even father wouldn't dare to offend him, let alone second brother and I. He's the top nobles, the true prodigy. Since you said so, I understand." Ji Tianxing nodded and smiled mockingly. That Prince Lian should be a member of the great Yang Empire's imperial family, right? He might even be a cousin of the current great Yang Emperor. Chapter 30. That's right. The third prince nodded and said solemnly, "The old emperor of the Great Yang Empire passed away 10 years ago. The cause of his death is unknown. He had 8 princes and 12 princesses. The old emperor was in his prime and had been at the peak of the Divine Lord realm for many years. He had been looking for an opportunity to break through to the Divine King realm. However, he didn't appoint a crown prince and suddenly passed away outside the empire. Even his corpse has not been found. This caused the Great Yang Empire to fall into chaos for half a year after his death. During this period, the princes fought for power and wealth to inherit the throne. Among them, the 2 most powerful princes were the eldest prince and the 4th prince. The eldest prince was the eldest son, and his mother was the empress. It was only logical that he should inherit the throne. Moreover, the imperial family members and elders supported him. However, the 4th prince argued that the eldest prince had something to do with the death of the old emperor and that the eldest prince had ulterior motives. He swore to seize the throne and investigate the cause of the old emperor's death to give the people an explanation. The 4th prince was very powerful and had won the support of the other princes, princesses, and officials. Moreover, he had recruited many top forces and was very powerful. When he heard this, Ji Tianqing frowned and asked, "Then the 4th prince failed? His grand prince Lian?" "No." The 3rd prince shook his head and explained, "The 4th prince did fail, but he was killed by the eldest prince's heaven-shaking divine sword outside the palace. Too many things happened during the fight between the 2 princes. Too many forces were involved, and the process was very complicated. It can't be explained in a few words. But in the end, the 1st prince won and rightfully inherited the throne, becoming the new emperor. The 4th prince was killed, and the 3 princes and 5 princesses who supported him, as well as a large number of court officials, were captured. Those people were either severely punished, imprisoned in the imperial city, or exiled to various divine kingdoms." Ji Tianqing nodded and asked, "So Grand Prince Lian was one of the 3 princes who supported the 4th prince?" "No." The 3rd prince shook his head again. "You." Ji Tianqing frowned and said unhappily, "Can you stop keeping me in suspense and tell me everything at once?" "Ah." The 3rd prince was a little embarrassed, so he explained straightforwardly, "Prince Lian is the 8th prince. He didn't participate in the fight for the throne. Before that incident, he had always been obsessed with the cultivation of the divine Tao and was determined to break through to the divine king realm. He wasn't interested in politics, power, or the throne, and he was only immersed in cultivation and pursued the peak of the divine Tao that was eternal and indestructible. Among the 8 princes, he was the most talented and the most favored by the old emperor. Many people even speculated that if he helped the 4th prince fight for the throne, he would most likely succeed. Ji Tianqing was even more confused and asked, "Since Grand Prince Lian is a martial maniac and didn't participate in the struggle for the throne, why was he exiled to Bloodflame Divine Country?" The 3rd prince was silent for a moment before replying, "Because he and the 4th prince are of the same mother. Even though he didn't participate in the fight for the throne, the 4th prince and their mother almost killed the 1st prince and took the throne. After the 1st prince fought for the throne, he killed the 4th prince and their mother. He also executed the entire 4th prince residence, killing more than 3,000 people. So that's how it is." Only then did Ji Tianqing come to a realization. No wonder Prince Lian didn't do anything and was punished. The 3rd prince continued, "After the 1st prince ascended the throne, Prince Lian acted very indifferent, as if he didn't care about the death of his brother and mother. Moreover, he was still immersed in cultivation and didn't show any signs of rebellion. Because of this incident, countless people in the imperial capital talked behind his back, saying that Prince Lian was an emotionless, cold-blooded animal. They really felt sorry for the 4th prince and his mother. But Prince Lian didn't move, as usual." Ji Tianqing continued, "But the more he acted like this, the more the 1st prince feared him. The 1st prince was also worried that if Prince Lian broke through to the Divine King realm, his death would come." "That's right." The 3rd prince nodded in agreement and said, "Therefore, after the 1st prince ascended the throne, he punished those traitors and Prince Lian. He gave the 8th prince the title of Prince Lian and rewarded him with tens of billions of resources to comfort him. He sent him to the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom as the overseer. The 8th prince's residence was kept, but all the servants, guards, and hangers-on were dismissed. When Prince Lian came to the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom, he only brought 2 servants, one old and one young, with him. It was miserable. Ji Tianxing said calmly, the first prince did this to keep Prince Lian away from the Great Yang Empire, away from the center of power, so that he wouldn't have a chance to stir up trouble. Moreover, he removed his subordinates and made him an idle prince in the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom. In this way, Prince Lian wouldn't be a threat to the first prince's throne. However, Prince Lian wasn't the kind of person who would take it lying down. I guess Prince Lian has been recruiting and scheming in the dark ever since he came to the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom. He probably wants to kill his way back to the Great Yang Empire to avenge his mother and brother. The 3rd prince frowned and thought for a while. He nodded and said, maybe. However, this kind of thing is better left unsaid. Who would dare to discuss it openly? After Prince Lian came to the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom, he built his residence into an impregnable fortress in just 3 years. Not only did he recruit thousands of guards, but he also recruited 300 diners and people with special abilities. Moreover, the 4th prince's old subordinates, including those top martial arts forces, have quietly joined him. Now, he has formed an alliance with the 5th prince. I guess he has some ulterior motives. I don't know what method he used to make father make the 5th prince the crown prince. This matter definitely has something to do with Prince Lian. Ji Tianxing nodded and asked, you just said that the 4th prince's old subordinates and those martial arts forces have all joined Prince Lian's faction? Does the Heavenly Union sect include those powerful martial arts forces? The 3rd prince nodded and said, yes. The Heavenly Union sect is one of the top 10 sects in the Great Yang Empire. However, after the Inheritance War 10 years ago, the Heavenly Union sect sacrificed a lot to help the 4th prince. Now, the Heavenly Union sect is much weaker than before. However, the Heavenly Union sect isn't the only sect that has joined Prince Lian. Based on our observations over the past 10 years, I'm afraid there's another top sect and several second-rate sects. In short, Prince Lian doesn't want to reveal himself because he doesn't want to attract the Great Yang Emperor's attention. However, he's been accumulating forces in secret and has long grown to a shocking extent. Now that he's interfering with father's crown prince selection, it must be part of his plan. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and muttered to himself, a 9th-level divine lord, the prince with the most talent and potential. Moreover, he's gathered a large number of experts and recruited 2 top sects. He's a formidable opponent. Chapter 30-31. Hearing Ji Tianxing's words, the 3rd prince smiled bitterly. Young Master Tianxing, I've told you so much. Do you still not understand? Prince Lian's identity, status, and influence far surpass ours. We're no match for him. Why should we throw an egg at a rock and seek our own destruction? Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said indifferently, even if we don't want to be enemies with him, we've already formed a deep grudge. Will he let us go? Of course, the person he wants to kill is me. You don't have to worry. At least, you're the 3rd prince of Bloodflame Divine Kingdom. As long as you don't form a death grudge with him, he won't make things difficult for you. This. The 3rd prince was stunned. He said awkwardly, although that's true, we're allies. Since we're helping each other, how can I let you fight alone? How can I watch you fight to the death with Prince Lian? Ji Tianxing shook his head and said indifferently, 3rd prince, you have too many ties and concerns. You'll never be able to settle grudges as quickly as I can. So, I appreciate your kindness, but you don't have to worry about this matter. But you. The 3rd prince saw that he was stubborn and wanted to persuade him. But Ji Tianxing waved his hand and interrupted him. Coincidentally, the 10 imperial guards had also finished cleaning up the battlefield and brought back a large pile of spoils. There were over 100 divine weapons and equipment. There were swords, spears, swords, halberds, armor, pill furnaces, and so on. There were also many interspatial rings that contained large amounts of godstones and resources. Occasionally, there were some rare treasures. In addition, there were over 600 pieces of godhead fragments scattered around the ruins. Ji Tianxing didn't want any of those divine weapons and cultivation resources. He only took the 600 pieces of Godhead fragments. To the third prince, those Godhead fragments weren't of much use. Divine weapons and equipment, as well as spatial rings filled with cultivation resources, were more practical. So, the two of them split the spoils and left the battlefield. They returned to Royal City. 4 hours later, Ji Tianxing, the third prince, and the others returned to Royal City. It was already afternoon. Royal City was very lively. Countless citizens and divine race members flooded the streets and rushed to the square in the center of the city. Because the divine blood ceremony would be held tomorrow, the commoners and the protoss had all rushed over in advance to take up space. The square in the center of the city had a radius of 30 miles. Even if the sky and the ground were filled with people, it could only accommodate 1 million people at most. However, there were millions of people in the royal city. In addition to the protoss who had rushed over from all over the country, there were millions more. If he went to the square to watch the battle tomorrow, there would definitely be no seats available. He barely managed to find a place to stay, but it was also at the edge of the square. If they were too far away, they wouldn't be able to enjoy the exciting battle. Moreover, at the end of the divine blood ceremony, the royal family would pluck a branch from the blood flame sacred tree. The tree branches would turn into a rain of blood that would cover the sky and cover the sun, scattering all over the square. The closer one was, the more blood fire divine chi they would be able to absorb. It would be of great help in modifying one's bloodline and improving one's talent and comprehension. After understanding this point, Ji Tianxing no longer found it strange. The third prince sent him back to Changfeng courtyard and returned to the palace. When Ji Tianxing returned to the Changfeng courtyard, the house that was destroyed last night had already been repaired by the craftsman. Although that incident had happened last night, the main culprit, the fifth prince, had already received a terrible punishment. Not only had he been heavily injured, both his legs had been crushed to pieces, and his body had been poisoned. For the time being, the fifth prince could only go into seclusion to heal his wounds and would not be able to come out to harm others. As for the second prince, he had made it clear that he wanted to cooperate with the third prince and would not harm Ji Tianxing. Thus, the Changfeng courtyard was very safe. After returning to his residence, Ji Tianxing entered the secret room alone and did not allow anyone to disturb him. He took out the Zhoutian 10 Absolutes Tower and placed it on the stone table in front of him. Then, he entered the 5th floor of the Divine Tower to visit his daughter, Wu Shuang. Whoosh! With a flash of divine light, he appeared in the origin divine formation. He looked around but did not see Wu Shuang's figure. Hey! When I rescued Wu Shuang, she was clearly on the altar. How come she's gone? Ji Tianxing was puzzled. Wu Shuang was still bound by the fifth prince's divine rope and could not use her divine power. Logically speaking, she could not have untied the divine rope and left the origin divine formation. Thus, Ji Tianxing entered the 6th floor of the distorted spacetime. After flying for a while in the distorted spacetime, he found Wu Shuang. Wu Shuang was sitting on the frigid ice jade bed with his eyes closed. The divine rope on her body had been broken into several pieces and was thrown to the side. Ji Ku was beside her, observing her situation. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing guessed the reason and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Big brother Tianxing, you're finally here. Ji Ku saw him and hurriedly greeted him. Ji Tianxing came to the bed and looked at Wu Shuang. Seeing that she was fine, he asked, Ku, did you save Wu Shuang? Ji Ku nodded and said, yes, I sensed through the divine tower that Wu Shuang was in the origin divine formation and was sealed by a divine weapon. I rushed to the altar to save Wu Shuang. Wu Shuang told me that she was kidnapped by the second prince. The second prince used her as a hostage and set up an ambush to force you to die. I guessed that since you dared to go, you must have made preparations and plans, so there shouldn't be a problem. Thus, I helped Wu Shuang untie the divine rope without discussing with you so as not to disturb you. Ji Tianxing was surprised and asked, the divine rope tied to Wu Shuang is a high-grade monarch-grade divine weapon. Even if I wanted to untie it, it would take a lot of effort. How did you untie the divine rope and cut it apart? Ji Ku pointed above and smiled, of course, I borrowed the power of the divine tower. Ji Tianxing came to a realization and did not ask anymore. Most of the time, he was the one using the divine tower and it seemed to be his divine weapon. But in reality, Jiku was the true master of this divine tower. After all, she had inherited the divine Tao inheritance of the divine bird phoenix and cultivated the 9 revolution undying art. This 9 heavens 10 absolutes tower had also become one with her and was connected by blood. Ji Tianxing, Wu Shuang, and the others still needed to cultivate the divine power of the phoenix's nest before they could return to the divine tower from afar. Ji Ku, on the other hand, did not need to. He could enter and leave at will with just a thought. At this moment, Ji Ku asked again, "Big brother Tianxing, is the crisis over? You successfully escaped from the encirclement." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Yes, I asked the 3rd prince and the imperial guards to set up an ambush on the 3rd level of the divine tower. Later, the 2nd prince also brought people to help. We worked together to kill the 5th prince's lackeys. The 5th prince was also severely injured by me and was poisoned. Unfortunately, when I was about to kill him, Grand Prince Lian came to save him." Ji Ku looked regretful and asked who Grand Prince Lian was. Ji Tianxing could only give her a brief introduction of Grand Prince Lian's background. After listening, Ji Ku said worriedly, "The strong enemy of the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom has not been dealt with yet, and now Grand Prince Lian of the Great Yang Empire is involved. You have to be more careful in the future." Chapter 30-32. Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood and advised Ji Ku not to worry too much. Counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. There would always be a way. Ji Ku did not say anything else and said with a smile, "Big brother Tianxing, I have good news for you." Ji Tianxing revealed an expectant expression. "What good news?" Ji Ku smiled and said, "Previously, you helped us solve our cultivation bottlenecks. My and eldest senior sister's cultivation has been much smoother. Now, she's breaking through to the Divine Lord realm and will succeed soon. My strength is also progressing smoothly and I'll be able to break through soon. If Wu Shuang's appearance had not interrupted her closed-door cultivation, she would have been able to break through even faster." Ji Tianxing said with relief, "That's great. When you break through to the Divine Lord realm, you can follow me and we can move together." Ji Ku quickly nodded, his eyes revealing a look of anticipation. At this moment, Ji Wu Shuang finished adjusting her breathing and opened her eyes. Seeing that Ji Tianxing had returned safe and sound, a look of joy appeared on her face. "Father, you've finally returned safely. That's great. The 2nd prince, that treacherous fellow, actually ambushed so many experts. I've been worried about you." Ji Tianxing took her little hand and patted her head, comforting her. "Don't worry, isn't father fine? Also, when has father ever done something that he's not confident in?" Ji Wu Shuang heaved a sigh of relief and her hanging heart settled back into her stomach. After calming down, her eyes were a little dim. She lowered her head and said with a voice full of self-blame, "Father, this is all my fault. Wu Shuang knows her mistake. If I hadn't left the Divine Pagoda to see what the Divine Realm was like, this storm wouldn't have happened and you wouldn't have been in danger. I don't want to see the Divine Realm anymore. The Divine Spirits here are no different from the people in the mortal world. They're all selfish, treacherous, and despicable. I'm too weak and can't protect myself. I'll only cause trouble for father. Therefore, I want to stay in the Divine Pagoda and work hard to cultivate and become stronger." In the past, Ji Wu Shuang had never seen the Divine Realm before and her heart was filled with longing and anticipation. The heavenly realm sounded very grand and lofty. It should be one of those illusory, immortal, and otherworldly paradises, right? However, after seeing it with her own eyes, she realized that this place was no different from the mortal world. It was just that the world was bigger, and the people and gods were stronger. It was still full of intrigue, deceit, and murder. With her strength, not only would she not be able to help Ji Tianxing, she would also become a burden. She was disheartened and only wanted to cultivate and become stronger. Ji Tianxing smiled gently as he held her small hand and comforted her. "Shuang, you don't have to blame yourself. This isn't your fault at all." He could only blame those people for being too sinister and despicable. However, you can't treat all gods as villains. Among the gods you've met before, there are some good people. Ji Wushuang hurriedly nodded in agreement and said, "Ian, that's right. At least that sister from Zhenhong was very kind. She almost lost her life trying to protect me. Father, I still have to go out and visit my sister in Zhenhong with you. I want to thank her in person and think of a way to help her heal. After settling her down, I'll return to the Divine Pagoda to heal. Is that okay?" Ji Tianxing nodded in agreement. "Of course. She was injured trying to protect you, so you have to thank her in person. As for healing her, Father has already made preparations. You don't have to worry." "Preparations?" Ji Wushuang revealed a puzzled expression and asked, "Father, did you already guess that she would be seriously injured?" "That's not it." Ji Tianxing couldn't help but smile and said, "Father has already seen that she is very special. She is a pearl covered in dust. Previously, I wanted to find an opportunity to give her some advice. Now that she is seriously injured, I will take this opportunity to give her an opportunity that will definitely benefit her immensely." "Really? That's great." Ji Wushuang found it hard to believe and said happily, "This is also good. You can help her and return the favor. Only then can I feel at ease. Amen, you rest for a while first. Father still has some things to take care of." Ji Tianxing pinched her little face and said with a smile, "When Father is done, I will bring you to visit her." "Okay." Ji Wushuang hurriedly nodded in agreement and continued to revolve and cultivate. Following that, Ji Ku went into seclusion to cultivate and assault the Divine Lord realm. Ji Tianxing also took out a large pile of divine spark fragments and started devouring and refining them. The divine spark fragments that the Imperial Guards found in the ruins of Westwind Town were basically all Divine Lord powerhouses. After all, close to 100 low-level Divine Lords and quite a few high-level Divine Lords were all killed on the spot. Even a dozen low-level Divine Lord-level Imperial Guards were also killed. Those divine spark fragments were scattered in the ruins and mixed together. It was very difficult to distinguish clearly. When the Imperial Guards cleaned up the battlefield, they only found over 600 fragments, which was already considered very little. Although these fragments were all low-level Divine Lord level, there were enough of them. However, there were enough of them, so Ji Tianxing didn't mind. He cast the devouring divine ability and swiftly devoured those divine spark fragments, absorbing the power inside and stripping away the divine Tao laws inside. Inside each divine spark fragment contained 3 to 5 kinds of divine Tao laws. Ji Tianxing screened them continuously, eliminating the laws that he already grasped and also eliminating those low-level and useless laws. This way, the divine Tao laws that were suitable for him to refine were few and far between. Time passed by quietly. Unknowingly, 12 days passed in the distorted space-time. Ji Tianxing had devoured all 600 pieces of the quintessence fragments. Half of the power went to the heaven-mending pearl, and the other half of the divine power went to him. This caused his power to skyrocket, reaching the peak of the 3rd-degree realm, just a step away from being able to break through to the 4th-degree realm and become a middle-level Divine Lord. In addition, he even stripped away 25 kinds of divine Tao laws from those divine spark fragments. Adding in his original 190 laws, the number of laws that he grasped reached as many as 215. This was a very terrifying number, surveying the entire Bloodfire Divine Kingdom. No, it should be within the entire Great Yang Empire. There probably wasn't a second person who possessed so many divine Tao laws. Even the Great Yang Empire's old emperor, that peak Divine Lord powerhouse, also couldn't possibly grasp so many laws. Only Divine King realm powerhouses could achieve it. At the same time that Ji Tianxing's strength skyrocketed, the divine power that he expended previously was replenished. Some of his injuries also naturally healed. He reached an even more powerful peak state and ended his cultivation. Waking up Ji Wushuang, who was still cultivating, the father and daughter pair left the divine tower and returned to the secret chamber. Although he was in closed seclusion in the distorted space-time for 12 days. But only 6 hours had passed in the outside world. It was the dead of the night. Ji Tianxing brought Ji Wushuang out of the secret chamber and rushed to Zhenhong's residence. Previously, Zhenhong was seriously injured and unconscious. Ji Tianxing used the life-saving divine light and healed 80% of her injuries. She was already fine now. It was just that there were still many hidden injuries that needed to recuperate for a period of time before she could recover. In the morning, she entered the secret chamber to recuperate. But she sat there for the majority of the day and was ultimately unable to calm her heart to recuperate. Her heart was uneasy and kept thinking about Ji Tianxing and Wu Shuang's safety. Fengyun Reading Network. Chapter 3033. Zhenhong had been in the secret chamber the whole time and had not come out. Therefore, she did not know the result. When the maid outside the secret chamber reported that Ji Tianxing and Wu Shuang had come to visit her, she was stunned on the spot. After coming back to her senses, she let out a long sigh of relief and smiled happily. When Ji Tianxing and Wu Shuang entered the secret chamber, she quickly got up to greet them. She looked at Wu Shuang up and down several times. When she saw that she was safe and sound, she said with red eyes, "Miss Wu Shuang, it's great that you're okay. I've been worried all day. Fortunately, you've returned safely." Ji Tianxing could see that Zhenhong's injury was not improving, so he guessed that she was not lying. Ji Wu Shuang bowed to her and thanked her sincerely. Zhenhong quickly supported her and said with some fear, "Young mistress, please get up. Zhenhong can't accept such a big gift. Moreover, Zhenhong failed to protect you. It's already a great kindness for young master Tianxing to not blame me." Both sides exchanged a few words. After Wu Shuang thanked him in person, Ji Tianxing asked her to return to the Divine Tower and go into seclusion to distort the space-time. The secret chamber quieted down. Only Ji Tianxing and Zhenhong were left. At this time, Ji Tianxing began to talk about business. "Miss Zhenhong, your injury has not healed. This time, not only Wu Shuang wants to thank you in person, but I also want to help you heal." Zhenhong was stunned for a moment and was quite moved. She quickly waved her hand and said, "Young Master Tianxing, I don't dare to trouble you anymore. Previously, you used that holy divine light to heal 80% of my injury. You really don't have to trouble yourself anymore." She was moved and lowered her head shyly, not daring to look at Ji Tianxing's face. For some reason, when she was alone with Ji Tianxing in the secret chamber, her heart would beat faster. Ji Tianxing said seriously, "Actually, it's not just about treating your injuries. It's also about your background." Family background? Zhenhong was stunned for a moment. He raised his head in confusion and stared at Ji Tianxing. "Young Master Tianxing, what do you mean?" Ji Tianxing didn't answer. He asked, "Do you remember what happened when you were young? Where did you grow up? What do your parents look like?" Zhenhong was a little surprised and asked awkwardly, "Mr. Tianxing, why did you suddenly ask this? Did His Majesty tell you?" Ji Tianxing shook his head and said, "No, it has nothing to do with the third prince. I never asked her about you." Only then did Zhenhong feel relieved. After seriously recalling for a moment, he said, "Before I was 12 years old, I had been living at the border of a neighboring country. It was a small village in the middle of the mountains. The village was surrounded by mountains on all sides and was very remote. There were only about 200 people in the village and everyone was very harmonious and close. For as long as I could remember, I had never seen my mother. It was always my father who brought me up. When my father was young, he was seriously injured and couldn't cultivate anymore. His body was very weak. He couldn't go to the jungle to hunt spirit beasts and divine beasts like other people. He also couldn't go to the workshop to work. It was almost impossible for him to live alone. Fortunately, the neighbors helped me and my father to live peacefully for so many years. Many times, I asked my father where my mother was. My father always lowered his head silently, as if he didn't want to talk about the past. I asked many times, but he only replied that my mother was very far away and couldn't be with us. When I was 12 years old, a group of strange and vicious people broke into our village. They were extremely vicious and evil. They killed all the people in the village and set the whole village on fire. My father was caught by them and was tortured. They forced my father to tell them some secrets. But my father didn't say anything and was tortured to death. Later, they caught me again and prepared to take me away. It was at that time that Master appeared. He had just returned from a neighboring country with a large number of guards and soldiers. He saved me on the way. Hearing this, Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "In that case, Your father is an ordinary Protoss. The problem lies with your mother. Zhenhong frowned and asked, Young Master Tianxing, what happened to my mother? What's the problem? Ji Tianxing stared at her and said solemnly, Your mother is not an ordinary Protoss. She has a noble bloodline. Ah! Zhenhong was shocked and in disbelief. How is that possible? My father has never mentioned it to me. Ji Tianxing continued, According to my speculation, your mother should be a dragon god. Dragon god? Zhenhong's expression was even more stunned. She was a little dizzy from the shock of this sudden news. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, That's right. She is the descendant of a divine dragon and a Protoss. The bloodline of the dragon gods is noble and powerful. They have the powerful physique and bloodline of the dragons and the cultivation talent and potential of the Protoss. Every dragon god has an 80% chance of becoming a divine lord. For every 100 dragon gods, there's a possibility of one divine king realm powerhouse appearing. Zhenhong was completely shocked and exclaimed in disbelief, How? How is this possible? There is such a powerful race in the world. Of course. Ji Tianxing nodded affirmatively and said, After all, the bloodline of the dragon gods is a combination of the characteristics of the dragons and the Protoss. It should be quasi-king level. In this world, the dragon gods should be ranked in the top 100 bloodlines. In order to maintain the purity and strength of their bloodline, the dragon gods have formulated an ancient rule that the dragon gods can only mate with other dragon gods. Once they mate with other races, not only will the dragon god's bloodline weaken, but they will also be severely punished by the dragon gods. Including the partner of the union and the children born, they will all be executed. Because the dragon gods think that it is blasphemy against them. Zhenhong was stunned for a long time before she murmured in a low voice, No wonder father was so infatuated and in love with mother, but never resented her for abandoning us and leaving. An ordinary Protoss and a noble dragon god. There must have been an unforgettable relationship between the two of them. But due to the ancestral teachings of the dragon gods and to protect father and me, mother had to leave, right? Zhenhong had a complicated look in her eyes as she murmured sadly. Her eyes were full of tears. After a long while, she collected her thoughts and bowed deeply to Ji Tianxing. Young Master Tianxing, thank you for clearing my doubts and letting me understand my background. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, Your dragon god bloodline has been diluted. You are not as monstrous and powerful as the pure-blooded dragon gods. Therefore, the dragon god bloodline does not have much impact on your appearance and body shape. But this also causes your body shape to be very different from that of ordinary Protoss women. At the same time, your talent and aptitude are also a bit stronger than ordinary Protoss. I see. Zhenhong came to a realization and said with a wry smile, I used to think that I was an anomaly among the Protoss, a freak. Because of this, I felt very inferior. Ji Tianxing smiled and said, No need to feel inferior. Your dragon god bloodline has not awakened yet. When I help you awaken your bloodline and evolve into the appearance of the dragon gods, the ones who should feel inferior are those Protoss women. Chapter 30-34. Awaken my bloodline? Zhenhong's eyes widened as she looked at Ji Tianxing in shock. Young master, can you help me awaken my dragon god bloodline? Of course. Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. This is not difficult for me. He did not say the rest of his words. After all, he had a real divine dragon by his side. There was also a half-dragon half-god guy. This sudden huge surprise made Zhenhong a little flustered, and her pretty face blushed a little. Young master, how can you help me awaken my bloodline? Ji Tianxing pointed to the purple jade bed in the corner of the secret room. Suddenly, Zhenhong's pretty face became even hotter, and she lowered her head shyly. Even the base of her neck was red. She hesitated for a moment before she got up, walked to the purple jade bed, and slowly lay down. Ji Tianxing frowned, and he did not know whether to laugh or cry. Why are you lying down? Meditate and activate your bloodline. Huh? Zhenhong realized that she had misunderstood and was immediately embarrassed. She hurriedly got up and sat cross-legged on the jade bed, closed her eyes, and began to activate her divine power. Ji Tianxing did not say anything else and used his divine sense to communicate with the black dragon. Little Black, lend me a drop of dragon blood. The black dragon was cultivating in seclusion when it suddenly heard this sentence, and its body trembled. Old G, you. What do you want to do? It instinctively had a premonition that something bad was going to happen. Ji Tianxing explained, don't be nervous, I only need a drop of dragon blood as a primer to activate Zhenhong's dragon god bloodline. You really only need a drop of blood? The black dragon relaxed and hurriedly activated its cultivation to force out a drop of dragon blood. Whoosh! A drop of pure black dragon blood the size of an egg flew out of the divine pagoda and landed in Ji Tianxing's palm. This drop of dragon blood was crystal clear like a black gemstone. It shone with 7-colored divine light and emitted a powerful dragon aura. Ji Tianxing glanced at Zhenhong and saw that she was still channeling her energy. Her bloodline had not been fully stimulated. Therefore, he sent out a burst of divine power from his left hand into Zhenhong's body to help her activate her bloodline power. Not long after, the blood in her body began to boil like a great river. Zhenhong's face also turned red. His skin swelled, and his veins bulged. He looked even more majestic. Furthermore, the state of her blood boiling caused her to sweat all over and her body to tremble uncontrollably. For a girl, this state was not beautiful. However, she couldn't care less. She could only calm herself down and focus on maintaining the circulation of her bloodline. Zhenhong, I'll use a drop of dragon blood to completely awaken your dragon god bloodline. The process will be a little painful, but you must hold on. As long as you can get through this, you'll be reborn. Although this sounded quite dangerous, Zhenhong chose to believe him and nodded in agreement. Understood. Ji Tianxing no longer hesitated. He pointed at her forehead with his right hand and shot out the black dragon blood. Swoosh! The egg-sized drop of black dragon blood turned into a pitch-black stream of water and drilled into her forehead. It swam in her mind, then spread to her limbs and bones, and quickly merged into her bloodline. Suddenly, her boiling and surging bloodline became even more violent as if it had encountered a shocking hurricane. Rumble! The speed of her blood surging immediately increased by 5 times, making a low sound like muffled thunder. Not only did it speed up, but the power of her bloodline also increased by several times. As it rushed through her meridians and blood vessels, it even stirred up layers of huge waves and vortexes. Such violent power caused Zhenhong's body to swell as if it was filled with air. Bang! 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 With a series of muffled explosions, her body continued to grow taller and wider. Her skin also cracked, and blood flowed out. Her meridians were widened, and her bones grew rapidly, becoming wider and stronger. In just 100 breaths, she had grown 6 feet taller and 50% larger. The dragon god bloodline hidden deep in her bloodline was completely activated. Her appearance also underwent a huge change. She no longer looked like an ordinary god. She had indeed become a dragon god. She was 4.5 meters tall, slender and vigorous, and filled with explosive power. The cracked skin all over her body was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Golden dragon scales gradually grew out from the areas where the blood was dripping. Her tailbone was also elongated, breaking through the constraints of her skin, and a dark golden dragon tail emerged. And the top of her head, a bone also broke out and quickly turned into a dragon horn, although that pale golden bone was only the embryonic form of a dragon horn. But in the future, as her strength continued to increase, that dragon horn would also grow. At this moment, Zhenhong was indeed as Ji Tianxing had said. She had broken through the cocoon and become a butterfly, bathed in blood and reborn. However, the pain she suffered was also unimaginable to ordinary people. Her blood boiled, her meridians and flesh were torn, her bones expanded and grew, her appearance changed and reformed. This kind of pain was equivalent to piecing her back together after being torn apart. She trembled in pain, her face was distorted, and her body was covered in blood and cold sweat. Although her will was strong, she clenched her teeth and did not let out a scream. But from time to time, 1 or 2 painful muffled groans overflowed from her mouth and nose. Ji Tianxing was most worried that she would not be able to bear the pain during the awakening process and fall into a coma. That would be the failure of the awakening, and it would cause irreversible damage to her. Fortunately, she was strong enough and had a strong will. She actually survived. After a full hour, her bloodline calmed down. The sudden changes in her appearance gradually stabilized. The pain like death by 1,000 cuts was also rapidly alleviating. The awakening was successful. Phew. Zhenhong let out a long sigh of relief, spat out a mouthful of blood, collapsed, and panted violently. It was as if the near-death experience had almost exhausted her mental and physical strength. So much so that she did not notice that the clothes on her body had been torn apart and turned into a pile of rags. Most of the rags were stained with blood and scattered on the ground. It could not cover her incomparably slender, vigorous, and perfect body after her evolution. Ji Tianxing witnessed the whole process, but he did not have a trace of distracting thoughts. He had been observing Zhenhong's situation. Seeing that her state was stable after the successful awakening, he warned, "You have successfully awakened the Dragon God bloodline and become a Dragon God warrior. But it is not over yet. The 5 hours after the awakening is the best time for you to lay the foundation of the divine Tao. Put on your clothes first, I will let the white dragon help you." After that, he took out a set of scarlet armor from the space ring and handed it to Zhenhong. This was a set of mid-grade monarch-level artifact, which could be enlarged or shrunk at will. It was as light as nothing when worn. Zhenhong did not care about her shyness. She used her power to clean up the blood and rags on her body, and quickly put on the scarlet armor. The slender and healthy body of the dragon goddess was immediately covered by the armor. But even so, it was difficult to hide her explosive curves and proud posture. She looked down at herself and whispered, "Young master really did not lie to me. This is the true form of the Dragon God clan. Such a perfect body is enough to make all the women of the God clan envious and jealous." Chapter 30-35. Sigh. Women. Ji Tianxing heaved a silent sigh. After all, Zhenhong's focus was a little strange. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything and contacted Bai Long in the Divine Tower with his divine sense. "Bai Long, it's time to work." Bai Long was also cultivating in the distorted spacetime, and he was completely focused. Suddenly, he heard Ji Tianxing's voice transmission, and he was immediately awakened. He quickly ended his cultivation and asked expectantly, "Master, is there a big battle again? Who are you going to kill this time?" Ji Tianxing said in a playful tone, "With your current strength, I won't call you even if there is a big battle." "Huh." Bai Long was a little embarrassed and asked with a smile, "Then what can I do for you, master?" Ji Tianxing said with a smile, "Do you still remember what I said to you before?" Bai Long thought for a moment and his expression suddenly changed. He asked with a wry smile, "You mean, extreme joy begets sorrow, and it'll be fine if you don't cry when the time comes?" "That's right." Ji Tianxing's smile became even more mocking. "Ahem." Bai Long's expression changed and he said fawningly, "Master, I'm so obedient, sensible, filial, and adorable. Cut the crap and come out." Ji Tianxing interrupted him simply and rudely. Bai Long left the Divine Tower and appeared in the secret chamber. Just as he was about to beg Ji Tianxing for mercy, he suddenly saw Zhenhong sitting on the jade bed in a crimson armor. He was stunned and a stunned expression appeared on his face. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow! Isn't this a female warrior of the dragon gods? Oh my god! Such an explosive and powerful figure, it's 1 in a million." Bai Long's eyes lit up and he asked subconsciously, "Master, where did you get such a superb dragon girl?" "Ahem." Ji Tianxing pretended to cough twice and frowned as he glared at Bai Long. Zhenhong also frowned as she stared at Bai Long. Her eyes were filled with shame and anger. "Ah! Ha 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 ha." Bai Long regained his senses and scratched his head awkwardly. He quickly explained, "Miss, don't be angry. I didn't mean to offend you. I was really praising you for your beauty when I was babbling nonsense just now." As he spoke, he sized up Zhenhong from head to toe, unable to hide his amazement. "Hey, miss, why do you look so familiar? You are. I remember now. You are from Zhenhong." Only then did White Dragon recognize that the awesome dragoness in front of him was Divine Lord Zhenhong. He glanced at Zhenhong, then looked at Ji Tianxing. A playful smile appeared on his face, as if he understood what was going on. "Heh heh heh. Master and Miss Zhenhong are together alone in the secret room again. Just as his mind was filled with fanciful thoughts, Ji Tianxing said calmly, "By Long, Miss Zhenhong has just awakened her dragon god bloodline and has yet to establish the foundation of the divine path. I'll leave this matter to you. Finish it in 10 hours. Ah! Bai Long's face suddenly stiffened. He said with grievance, "So it's this matter. It's not your fault. Master, can we discuss it again?" "There's no room for discussion," Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly. "Weren't you laughing happily just now? Besides, you are also a half-dragon and half-god. You have the most experience. You are the most suitable person to handle this matter." Bai Long's expression was bitter. He frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he thought of something. He looked at Ji Tianxing and asked, "Master, are you planning to take Miss Zhenhong into your harem?" Ji Tianxing glared at him and said angrily, "Is Master that kind of person?" He. Bai Long continued to laugh. "Master, although you are loyal to the two mistresses, Miss Zhenhong also has feelings for you. She is deeply in love with you. It's a once-in-a-lifetime fate to have a top-grade dragon girl like Miss Zhenhong. How can you let her down?" Ji Tianxing asked with a smile, "Do you think that you won't lose out if you help her because I want to take her into my harem? Otherwise, she's just a passerby. There's no need to make such a big sacrifice for her, right?" "Well, of course." Bai Long nodded without hesitation and said, "You also know that I have to use 90% of my divine power and soul power to help her establish the foundation of the divine path. I also have to use a lot of Dragon Clan's secret techniques. I will also be injured. After the matter is done, I will need to rest for at least a year to recover to my peak. We are not related to her. There's no reason for us to help her like this, right?" Ji Tianxing was a little hesitant. He also felt that it was unfair to treat Bai Long like this. But he and Zhenhong, there was no such thing. Sigh. Master only helped her awaken her bloodline because she is pure and kind. She also risked her life to protect Shuang-Er. There's no such messy thoughts at all. Bai Long nodded to show that he understood and said with a smirk, "Forget it. I will help her establish the foundation first. Although you don't like her now, feelings need to be cultivated slowly. You also need to communicate deeply. Love will only develop over time." Ji Tianxing guessed that he was driving, but he didn't have any evidence, so he didn't bother to argue with him. "Then let's begin." Bai Long nodded and began to use his secret techniques to help Zhenhong establish the foundation of the divine path. Zhenhong didn't know her identity before and only cultivated as an ordinary god. Therefore, her divine power and foundation of the divine path were accumulated from the God Clan's secret techniques. But now, she had awakened the dragon god's bloodline and become a dragon girl. Ordinary God Clan's secret techniques were no longer suitable. Only by using the Dragon Clan's secret techniques as her foundation could she spread her wings and soar and go further in the future. Bai Long first used his secret techniques to comb her meridians, divine power, and divine soul. After her condition stabilized, he taught her the Dragon Clan's secret techniques. This process was very complicated. There couldn't be the slightest mistake. It was like building a palace with bricks. Once there was a problem with the foundation, it was likely to cause the entire palace to tilt, crack, and collapse. At the same time, he had to speed up and complete it within 10 hours. This made him have to go all out and consume divine power and soul power regardless of the cost. After all, he hadn't reached the Divine Lord realm yet, but Zhenhong was a third-stage lower Divine Lord. This was also a great challenge for him. Time passed quietly. 6 hours passed quickly. Bai Long completed the first 2 steps and taught Zhenhong 18 Dragon Clan's secret techniques. Next, he had to guide Zhenhong to master the 18 Dragon Clan's secret techniques and condense them into the foundation of the divine path. Fortunately, Zhenhong completely obeyed Ji Tianxing's instructions and cooperated with Bai Long to cast the secret techniques. Furthermore, her talent and comprehension ability were greatly improved, understanding with a little hint. In addition, there was still Ji Tianxing supervising the entire process, guiding by the side all along. That made the process very smooth. Unknowingly, another 4 hours passed. The 10-hour deadline was already up. After this, Zhenhong's dragon god bloodline returned to silence. Wanting to establish a foundation and imprint the Dragon Clan's secret techniques again would be doubly difficult. Fortunately, Bai Long successfully completed the mission. Zhenhong's Divine Path Foundation was successfully condensed, and she broke through to the 4th level Divine Lord realm as a matter of course. Chapter 30-36. Swoosh. Zhenhong sat cross-legged, closing both eyes to revolve and cultivate. Her entire body bloomed with soaring golden light, emitting sacred dragon aura undulations. Dazzling golden light boiled and surged, condensing into the scene of 9 golden dragons circling and dancing. Such a gorgeous scene was precisely the light and shadow of her Divine Tao Foundation condensing and breaking through to the 4th level Divine Lord realm. She suppressed the surprise and excitement that filled her, trying her best to maintain calm, revolving and stabilizing her foundation and divine power. This breakthrough made her become a middle-level Divine Lord. Not only did her strength advance by leaps and bounds, her Divine Tao also underwent a change. Successfully awakening the Dragon God bloodline, her Divine Tao cultivation would be a smooth path in the future. Furthermore, how far she could walk on the path of Divine Tao, what peak she could climb to, there were also limitless possibilities. A true nirvanic rebirth, shedding one's mortal body and exchanging one's bones. As for the White Dragon, expended 90% of his divine power and soul force, and even paid with 18 dragon race ultimate arts. His complexion was already pale as paper, his entire body dripping with sweat, sprawled on the ground like a pile of mud, gasping for breath. Ah! I feel like my body has been hollowed out. Even if he was so tired, he also did not forget to be mischievous. He even blinked at Ji Tianxing and transmitted his voice weakly. Master, this disciple is filial enough, right? For your fortune, this disciple made such a great sacrifice. If you don't arrange a few beautiful little female dragons for this disciple in the future, it would be letting down this disciple's painstaking effort. Ji Tianxing glared at him huffily. Shut up, you, return to the divine pagoda and recuperate properly. Finished talking, he manipulated the 9 heavens 10 absolute pagoda and put the white dragon away into the distorted space-time. Thinking for a while, he took out a large pile of monarch-rank divine pills and source stones and threw them beside the white dragon to express comfort and reward. After that, he quietly left the secret chamber. Zhenhong stayed in the secret chamber and continued to revolve and regulate his breathing, stabilizing his foundation. 4 hours later, the sun had risen. A new day had arrived. Ji Tianxing was currently resting in the room when the guard outside reported that the 3rd prince came to visit. Hence, Ji Tianxing got up and headed to the study to meet the 3rd prince. The two of them greeted each other and took their respective seats. The 3rd prince smiled and said, Mr. Tianxing, the divine blood ceremony is about to begin. How are your preparations going? Ji Tianxing nodded and said, of course, no problem. I can join the battle at any time. The 3rd prince waved his hand and said with a chuckle, that won't be necessary. This year's divine blood ceremony will be organized by this prince. Today was the first day. There would be a grand ceremony. It would take a long time before the arena competition would begin. Moreover, the arena competition on the first day was only to determine the top 30. This prince has already made arrangements for you. You don't need to participate in today's competition. You can directly enter the top 30. Tomorrow morning will be the time for you to show your prowess and suppress everyone. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, 3rd prince, I have something to ask of you. If you have something to say, just say it. The 3rd prince nodded without hesitation. Ji Tianxing asked, for those who want to participate in the Challenge Arena tournament, the registration ended yesterday, right? The 3rd prince nodded and said, that's right. The registration condition is to reach the Divine Lord realm within 1,000 years of age. There are not many people who meet this condition, and all of them are famous geniuses. In the entire Divine Kingdom, there are no more than 500 people, right? As of yesterday evening, there were a total of 181 people who signed up. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, can you do me a favor and add the name of Miss Zhenhong? The 3rd prince suddenly frowned and said with a startled face, Miss Zhenhong also wants to participate in the arena competition. This is her idea, or your decision. Ji Tianxing did not answer. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is there a problem?" The third prince spread his hands and said indifferently, "Although Miss Zhenhong meets the registration conditions and can be considered a genius with outstanding talent. But in every arena competition, those geniuses who can enter the top 10 are all middle-level divine lord. Even if she participates, it is impossible for her to enter the top 10 and she will be seriously injured. This is meaningless and will affect the normal affairs of the Longwind courtyard." Ji Tianxing said with a chuckle, "Just last night, she broke through to the 4th stage and became a middle-level divine lord." Ah! The third prince was shocked and showed an expression of disbelief. How is this possible? Didn't she just get seriously injured and her injuries have not even healed? How did he manage to break through to 4th stage realm in just one night? Ji Tianxing was about to explain the whole story. At this time, the voice of the guard came from outside the door. Reporting to young Master Tianxing, Miss Zhenhong requests an audience. Ji Tianxing looked at the third prince and said with a smile, "Since she is here, you should see for yourself." As his voice fell, Zhenhong, who was wearing a red armor, stepped into the study. When she stepped through the door of the study, she had to bend down to avoid hitting the door bar. After all, this door was designed for the divine race and was only 10 feet tall. And Zhenhong's height had reached 1.5 feet. When she entered the study, Ji Tianxing and the third prince, who were sitting, felt a sense of oppression. After all, not only was her body slender and tall, but her curves were also abnormally hot. Especially the proportion of her legs, which reached 60% of her body. Although her whole body was wrapped in red armor, only her shoulders were exposed. But her face was more beautiful, and her facial features had a kind of determined heroic spirit. Her temperament became more special and charming. Moreover, the short little golden dragon horn on her forehead looked a little silly and cute. The third prince was dumbfounded on the spot. He stared straight at Zhenhong and stood up with a bang. He was so shocked that he forgot himself. You are Miss Zhenhong?" The third prince pointed at her and asked in shock, stuttering a little. No matter how calm and experienced he was, he could not bear such a big shock. In just a short time, Miss Zhenhong had become like this. He found it hard to accept. Zhenhong was also stunned for a moment before she bowed to him. "Zhenhong greets the Lord." Then, she looked at Ji Tianxing and bowed deeply. She said sincerely, "Zhenhong will remember young master's kindness for giving me a new lease of life. I will never forget it." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and asked, "Has your foundation been stabilized? Can you adapt?" Zhenhong quickly replied, "Young master, don't worry. After 4 hours of recuperation, I can control myself freely. The feeling of being reborn is really wonderful." "That's good." Ji Tianxing looked gratified and said, "Just now, I told the third prince to add your name to the list and participate in the divine blood ceremony. What do you think?" Zhenhong was stunned for a moment. Then, she showed a grateful look and quickly nodded. "Thank you for your support, young master. I will do as you say. Zhenhong also wants to try and see how big the gap is between me and the top 10 geniuses." The third prince stared blankly at the two of them asking and answering questions. His expression was a little strange, and he even felt that it was a little ridiculous. Why do they act like master and servant? It seems that Zhenhong only has eyes for him and treats him as her master. This prince is clearly her master. Fengyun Reading Network. Chapter 3037. For a long time, Zhenhong had always obeyed orders. Her personality was simple, kind, courageous, and determined. The third prince couldn't understand how Ji Tianxing could capture Zhenhong's heart in just a few days. With Ji Tianxing present, he, the real master, seemed superfluous. So embarrassing. Could it be that Zhenhong became like this and became a mid-level divine lord because of Ji Tianxing? Thinking of this, the third prince was even more shocked and felt that it was incredible. "Young Master Tianxing, how did you do it?" He stared at Ji Tianxing with a burning gaze, his eyes full of amazement. Ji Tianxing said with an indifferent expression, "This is her original appearance, it's just that she hasn't awakened. What I did was just to give her a push and help her awaken sooner." Although he said it casually, The third prince was well aware of how miraculous this was. He saved Zhenhong and devoted hundreds of years to cultivate her, but he didn't see the problem with Zhenhong's bloodline. As a result, Ji Tianxing helped Zhenhong awaken after only a few days. This was a real powerhouse. Awesome. After holding back for a long time, the third prince could only use these two words to describe Ji Tianxing. The noble prince who spoke elegantly actually said such vulgar words. One could imagine how big of an impact this matter had on him. After calming himself down, the third prince said expectantly, "Since young master has helped Zhenhong and given her such an opportunity, then she will definitely be able to soar to the sky in this competition. Let's go watch the ceremony together. This prince will add Zhenhong's name and see how amazing her performance is." The three of them didn't delay any longer and hurriedly left the study and walked out. At the gate of Changfeng Courtyard, the third prince's carriage was already waiting. 8 white-winged pagazi pulled a large and luxurious carriage, accompanied by hundreds of people. The third prince, Ji Tianxing, Zhenhong, and others boarded the carriage one by one and drove toward the city square. Along the way, they passed through several wide streets, which were bustling with noise and excitement. There were people everywhere. Gods of all shapes and sizes were jostling shoulder to shoulder. Countless commoners and gods converged into a surging tide and surged toward the plaza in the center of the city. It was very difficult to travel on the road, so 8 Pegasus pulled the carriage into the sky. Not long after, the carriage arrived at the plaza in the middle of the city. As early as 2 days ago, the venue in the square had been set up. At this moment, the square with a radius of tens of miles was already packed with people. At a glance, it looked like an endless tide. The square was surrounded by empty space. Ordinary citizens and protoss could only watch the ceremony from the ground. In the center of the square, there was an arena with a radius of 10 miles, enveloped by a sky-blue ball of light. Directly above the arena, there was a ceremonial platform with a radius of 3,000 feet. The decorations were sacred and solemn. There were hundreds of imperial guards guarding the ring and the ceremonial stage. Around the square, there were also tens of thousands of armored and sword-wielding guards standing there like statues. The presence of the imperial guards was like an invisible shackle, making everyone behave and not dare to cause trouble. Around the ceremonial stage, there were 4 viewing platforms suspended in the air in the 4 directions of north, south, east, and west. The viewing platforms were spacious and comfortable, and could accommodate tens of thousands of people. Only the relatives of the emperor, the upper-class nobles, and famous experts were qualified to sit on the platforms to watch the ceremony. When the third prince's carriage arrived, there was a burst of cheers and discussion in the square. After all, the second prince and the third prince had been fighting for many years. Both of them had done everything they could to create a glorious image in the court and among the commoners. They had a large number of supporters. The carriage flew to the northern viewing platform and stopped. The third prince, Ji Tianxing, and the others walked out one by one. When they saw Ji Tianxing and Zhenhong, countless commoners, protoss, and nobles looked at them curiously. Most people did not recognize Ji Tianxing, nor did they recognize Zhenhong, who had just completed his transformation. Everyone was puzzled. Who were these 2 people? Why were they with the third prince? Were they from the hidden nobles? Or were they disciples of the big sects or aristocratic families that did not show themselves? Or were they the top geniuses that the third prince had just recruited? After everyone was seated, the carriage left. This viewing platform was in the best position. It could overlook the entire square and see the ceremonial stage and the arena clearly. Only the relatives of the emperor and important officials of the country were qualified to sit there. The second prince and his subordinates had already taken their seats on the viewing platform. Over 100 people were seated around the second prince, and they were chatting in low voices. Seeing the third prince arrive, the second prince did not look at him. But he nodded at Ji Tianxing and greeted him in a subtle way. At this time, the viewing platforms in the east, west, and south were already full. There were not many seats left. The third prince first found the officiator in charge of the ceremony and quietly added Zhenhong's name. Then, seeing that the time was almost up, he got up and flew to the ceremonial stage. The second prince, the princesses, and the idle lords of the older generation followed him to the ceremonial stage. There were more than 20 people, all of whom were direct descendants of the Duanmu family. They were also the most distinguished members of the royal family. Everyone was dressed in splendid clothes. They looked dignified and solemn as they lined up on the ceremonial stage. Then, as the host of the ceremony, the third prince began to read the divine scripture and the imperial edict. This series of content was not only tedious and lengthy, but also difficult to understand. But the general meaning was nothing more than to describe the significance of the divine blood ceremony and let the people remember the deeds of the martyrs. Ji Tianxing listened absent-mindedly. His eyes swept across the many members of the royal family and found something interesting. The fifth prince did not attend today's ceremony. Ha ha! It seems that the boy's injuries are too serious and the poison has not been removed. Also, his legs were crippled by me. He looks too pathetic and is not suitable to attend such an occasion. Since that is the case, would the king still appoint a prince who has lost his power and his legs as the crown prince of the divine kingdom? As this thought flashed through his mind, Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a playful smile. He subconsciously turned his head and looked around. He saw a familiar face in the center of the eastern viewing platform. As always, he was wearing a black dragon robe with golden threads and a luxurious golden crown. His face was fair and handsome. It was Prince Lian. When he looked at Prince Lian also sensed his gaze and looked at him with a cold gaze. Their eyes met. Both of them had cold expressions and sharp gazes. The hostility and murderous intent in their eyes made the people around them feel cold and couldn't help but tremble. Zhenhong was next to him. Sensing the abnormality, he looked at Prince Lian in confusion. He lowered his head and asked Ji Tianxing through telepathy, "Young master, what's wrong? Is that person your enemy?" Ji Tianxing looked away and nodded calmly. Zhenhong pursed his lips and said firmly through telepathy, "Young master, please consider the overall situation and be patient for the time being. After the divine blood ceremony, Zhenhong will definitely help you eliminate the enemy." Ji Tianxing showed a hint of surprise and asked with a chuckle, "Do you know who that person is? P.S. Readers, I am He Wuhan. I recommend a free app that supports downloading, listening to books, zero ads, and multiple reading modes. Please follow, book friends, quickly follow." Chapter 3038. Zhenhong shook her head. Obviously, with her identity and status, she could not come into contact with Prince Lian. Ji Tianxing smiled and comforted her. "Don't think too much. Just do your own thing." Zhenhong pursed her lips and did not say anything. She knew that she was still too weak to help young Master Tianxing. She silently made up her mind to live up to young Master Tianxing's expectations. She had to become a powerful high-level divine lord in the shortest time possible. She could not tarnish the reputation of the dragon gods. In the blink of an eye, an hour passed. After the third prince finished reading the divine Bible and the edict, he led the royal family members to kneel and kowtow to the spirits of their ancestors. After this series of tedious things were done, the royal family members left. Then, the arena competition that the million god clan members and commoners were looking forward to the most was finally about to begin. The second prince and the third prince stayed on the stage. The third prince announced with a solemn expression and a booming voice, "I will be the host of this year's divine blood ceremony. Second brother and everyone will supervise the entire process. Now, I announce the start of the arena competition. A total of 182 young elites have signed up for this year's divine blood ceremony. The competition will be decided by drawing lots. 2 people will fight in public. The loser will be eliminated and the winner will advance. In the process of the competition, it is strictly forbidden to borrow external forces, to have deaths, and to cheat." The third prince announced the rules of the competition. In fact, it was no different from the arena competition of previous divine blood ceremonies. The millions of Protoss present were well aware of the rules and regulations. After the ceremony, the drawing of lots began. The third prince took out 152 golden jade slips and threw them into the sky. Each jade slip flashed with golden light and flew in the sky, forming a huge ball of light. The appearance and aura of these jade slips were exactly the same. The only difference was the name engraved on the jade slips. When the jade slips filled the sky and danced for a while, the order was completely disrupted. Even the third prince could not remember them clearly. The second prince finally made his move. He kept shooting out beams of divine light and pulled out jade slips from the golden ball of light. The first battle, Jiao Ni from Xianshui Commandery versus Jiyu Changfeng from Chunyang Commandery. The second battle was between Liu Jiyu from Tongwen County and Li Shu from Blackwind County. The third match is from. Every time he drew out 2 jade slips, the second prince would open them and read out the names on the jade slips. Behind him was an imperial army commander who was in charge of recording the participants and the order in which they fought. As for the god race commoners in the square, every time they heard the name of a young genius, there would be a burst of exclamations and discussions. Obviously, the young geniuses who were qualified to participate in the grand competition all had quite a reputation among the common people. After a long time, when the second prince read the 71st battle, he frowned slightly and glanced at the third prince from the corner of his eye. But he didn't say anything and just announced loudly as usual, the 71st battle, Zhenhong from Bloodflame County versus Tang Yu from Darkblood County. Obviously, the second prince knew that Zhenhong was not on the list. Now that she was on the list, it was most likely added by the third prince at the last minute. Although this was not in line with the rules and was a form of favoritism. But he and the third prince were not gentlemen and had done this kind of thing countless times. He wouldn't use this trivial matter to attack the third prince. He just couldn't understand what the third prince was doing. He actually let the captain of the Last Wind Courtyard participate in this grand competition. Wasn't this looking for a beating? When the time comes, they would lose miserably, lose face for the Last Wind Courtyard and slap the third prince's face. Perhaps, the third prince would become the laughingstock of the royal city. After reading the battle list, the second prince put down all the jade slips. He and the third prince stood on the ceremonial stage to supervise the grand competition. The sky blue defensive light shield under their feet also opened a door. 2 young talents flew out of the crowd and went up to the arena to start the battle. Those 2 were Jiao Ni and Jiyu Changfeng. As the first battle of this grand competition, the 2 were under a lot of pressure in front of millions of people and were very cautious. First, they probed each other and attacked. After hundreds of moves back and forth, they tested each other's details and began to speed up the pace of their attacks. For the millions of gods and the common people, the battle between the 2 was very exciting and attracted cheers from time to time. However, the nobles and experts on the 4 viewing platforms did not react to it at all. As for the 2 princes on the ceremonial stage, they didn't even have the interest to take a second look. After all, the strength of the 2 young geniuses was only at the second level of the Divine Lord realm. The second prince was bored, so he turned his head to look at the third prince and asked with a faint smile, "Is it necessary to spend so much money and take such a big risk for a captain of the maidservants?" The third prince certainly understood what he was talking about. He was not angry. He smiled confidently and pretended to be unfathomable. "How can you guess this king's mind?" The second prince curled his lips and sneered, "With your little mind? Do you really think this king doesn't understand? Isn't it just a honey trap to win over young Master Tianxing? However, this king really admires you. In just one day, you transformed Zhenhong into that appearance. When Zhenhong entered the arena just now, I don't know how many pairs of eyes were staring at her. I don't know how many rich and powerful children and young geniuses are amazed by her." The third prince was a little smug, but he didn't expose the truth. He said with a smug face, "So, second brother, just wait for the show." "What?" The second prince raised his eyebrows and sneered, "Don't tell me you still have hope that Zhenhong can make it into the top 10? Why not?" the third prince asked. The second prince turned around and looked at Zhenhong carefully. Then, he stretched out 4 fingers and said to the third prince, 4 counties. "Do you want to bet?" The 2 brothers had a tacit understanding. The third prince naturally understood what he meant. Whoever lost would have to give up 4 counties and withdraw all their forces and properties. Although it wasn't a shocking bet, it would still hurt the third prince. The third prince pursed his lips and nodded heavily. "Okay. This king will bet with you. Ha ha. You're really confident. The second prince couldn't help but look at him in a new light. He sneered and said, unfortunately, confidence is not enough. You're destined to lose. What do you mean? The third prince was calm and composed as he asked with a smile. The second prince's smile was somewhat mocking. He said slowly, in recent years, this king has secretly recruited more than 3,000 young talents and has been secretly training them. This king has selected more than 20 geniuses with the strongest talent and potential in this arena competition. Not only this king, but also all Wu. Although he is seriously injured and in seclusion, he can't attend this ceremony. But in order to train his trusted subordinates, he didn't hesitate to put more than 30 young geniuses into this competition. Let's put it this way, the top 10 spots are all taken by us. Your Zhenhong girl has no hope at all. Chapter 30-39. The third prince's face suddenly turned ugly. Although, he also had the intention to cultivate a team of forces. 9 young geniuses were stuffed into the slots for the arena competition this time. Including Zhenhong, there were a total of 10 geniuses, all of whom were his trusted aides. But now he realized that compared to the second prince and the fifth prince, he was simply too kind. There were only a total of 180 geniuses who were qualified to sign up. The second prince and the fifth prince's trusted aides were more than 60 people, occupying 1/3 of the quota. This arena competition was simply organized for the two of them. At that time, 9 out of the 10 geniuses who could receive the baptism of the blood flame sacred tree would be their people. The third prince also felt that Zhenhong definitely had no hope. The most important thing was that he would definitely lose the bet and give up the territory of 4 counties. This time he would lose miserably. The third prince sighed silently, his mood became heavy, and his expression was somewhat gloomy. Seeing his reaction, the second prince's mood was incomparably carefree, and even hummed a little tune. The third prince knew that this was deliberately angering him, but he could not vent his anger, so he could only suppress his anger. At this time, the first round of the tournament ended. Jiao Ren'ai and Jiyu Changfeng exchanged more than 1,000 moves, and fought for half an hour before the winner was finally decided. Jiyu Changfeng lost to Jiao Ren'ai's sword by a difference of 1 move, and left the stage full of regret. The whole place was filled with cheers, and Jiao Ren'ai opened his arms to embrace the sky, his face brimming with a victorious smile. On the viewing platform, Zhenhong had been watching the battle attentively, watching carefully. Seeing Ji Tianxing looking around with a worried look, she could not help but ask, "Young master, why are you not watching the battle?" "Oh." Ji Tianxing came back to his senses, waved his hand and said, "It's just chickens pecking at each other, nothing to watch." Zhenhong still had a lot of things to say, but she choked back, not knowing how to continue. Originally, she wanted to persuade Ji Tianxing, although he was predetermined to be in the top 30, and did not need to participate in today's tournament. But he needed to know more about his opponent, so that he could win more easily. But now it seemed that all these were nonsense. So, she kept silent and continued to watch the second round seriously. The sun continued to rise, and time passed quickly. Unknowingly, it was already noon. The grand competition had already progressed to the 30th round, and more than 30 geniuses had successfully advanced. During this period of time, over 70 young geniuses fought intensely, and they presented many brilliant scenes. 7-colored divine light that blotted out the sky, dazzling and ever-changing divine light, and endless loud noises and explosions rang out in the arena for a long time. The millions of God Clan warriors in the square were dazzled and excited. While everyone was enjoying the feast for their eyes, they also gained a lot of enlightenment from it. Cheers and worried screams could be heard one after another. Zhenhong watched every match carefully and paid special attention to the dozen or so winners. Taking advantage of the fact that the next match had yet to begin, she frowned and pondered, analyzing the characteristics and weaknesses of those young geniuses. At this time, Ji Tianxing patted her leg and asked, "What are you thinking about?" It couldn't be helped. When they sat together, there was a height difference of 2 meters. Even if Ji Tianxing wanted to pat her on the shoulder, he would have to jump up. Therefore, he could only find a place where he could reach. "Young master, there are a dozen or so young geniuses who are very strong. I'm analyzing their weaknesses and thinking of countermeasures. Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, "Don't be so nervous. Why are you thinking so much? None of the people on the arena today are a match for you. Your real opponents are all in the top 30. Heh." Zhenhong was quite surprised and said uneasily, "Young master, do you really think I can make it into the top 30? Ji Tianqing shook his head. "Not the top 30, but the top 10. Zhenhong, degree, what? You're not confident?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows when he saw her dazed expression. Zhenhong became even more uneasy. She lowered her head and murmured, "You have such high expectations of me. I'm really afraid I'll disappoint you." Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "Don't think so much. When you get on the arena, don't think about your opponent's moves, attributes, and weaknesses. You just need to focus and use all your strength to execute the Dragon Tribe's ultimate techniques that you've just mastered. The battle will be over. You're worrying so much now because you don't understand how strong you are. When you enter a berserk state and transform into a female T-Rex, you'll be so strong that even you are afraid of yourself." Zhenhong was stunned again. Oh, seeing her dazed expression, Ji Tianqing couldn't help but reach out and flick her forehead. Unfortunately, he couldn't reach her and could only withdraw his hand awkwardly. "Young master, what's wrong?" Zhenhong looked at him in confusion. After thinking for a moment, she understood and took the initiative to bend down and lower her head, placing her forehead in front of him. Ji Tianqing was speechless. He said in a bad mood, "Close your eyes and don't observe the battle. Revise your ultimate techniques." "Yes, young master." Zhenhong nodded. As expected, she closed her eyes and began to review the Dragon Tribe's ultimate techniques. The sun gradually set in the west. 2 hours later, it was finally Zhenhong's turn to go on stage. The 71st battle was between her and Tang Yu of the Darkblood County. When Zhenhong, dressed in crimson armor, stepped onto the stage with a solemn expression, scattered cheers sounded in the square, mixed with ear-piercing whistles. Moreover, all of them were young men with dazed expressions and dazed eyes. It was obvious that the people didn't recognize Zhenhong in her dragon girl form. Those young men cheered only because of her beauty. As for her opponent, he was an out-and-out young genius. He was dressed in a green robe and wielded a sword. His long hair fluttered in the wind. His face was handsome, and his temperament was elegant. Most importantly, his strength had reached the 4th level of the Divine Sovereign realm, ranking him among the middle-level Divine Sovereign. This person stepped on the sky and calmly stepped onto the stage, causing countless people to cheer. There were also many God Tribe women who excitedly shouted his name, like a group of little fangirls. Without a doubt, Tang Yu was one of the best of the younger generation and was very famous. He wasn't just famous in the Darkblood County. In recent decades, he had mingled in the royal city and made a name for himself. In the hearts of countless people, the result of the battle between these two would be decided in less than 100 breaths. Tang Yu would undoubtedly win. After the two of them stepped onto the stage, they simply bowed and greeted each other, then attacked. Tang Yu was naturally elegant and graceful, waving his sword and displaying his divine powers. He only used 80% of his strength, preparing to test the waters with a few moves before using his full strength to defeat Zhenhong. In this way, not only did he take care of Zhenhong's face, but he also maintained his own image. However, Zhenhong obeyed Ji Tianqing's instructions. Without any distractions, she threw away all distracting thoughts and used the Dragon Tribe's ultimate techniques with all her might. Dragon Shadow Palm. Her body ignited with golden light that soared into the sky, erupting with violent divine power, and brazenly slashed out a sky full of dragon claw phantoms. Bang! 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 In just an instant, the sky full of golden dragon claw phantoms drowned Tang Yu, and an earth-shattering explosion erupted. Chapter 3040. Boom! Boom! Loud noises like muffled thunders exploded in the arena one after another. Tang Yu's sword Dao divine ability directly fell apart. He was also hit by the dragon claws and flew out in a sorry state. He drew an arc in the sky and fell tens of thousands of feet away. He struggled to get up, but his face was pale and he spat out 3 blood arrows in a row. In the end, he staggered and swayed a few times before he fell on the arena with a plop. It was not until then that the trembling arena gradually calmed down. The battle came to an abrupt end. Tang Yu was defeated by Zhen Hong in one move. It was a real insta-kill. When the golden light dissipated, everyone could see the situation in the arena. Everyone was dumbfounded. Not only were the millions of Protoss collectively petrified, but they also stared at Zhen Hong and Tang Yu, who was seriously injured and lying on the ground. Even the dignitaries and experts on the 4 viewing platforms were shocked. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. Even the second prince and the third prince, who were standing on the stage, were stunned. Before this, there were few battles between geniuses that could cause such a reaction. Now, Zhen Hong did it. Of course, Zhen Hong was also dumbfounded. She stood on the stage in a daze, looking at her right hand in a daze. Her eyes were filled with tears. At this moment, her emotions were very complicated and she was very excited. But she couldn't laugh. She just wanted to cry. It would be best if she threw herself into the arms of the young master and burst into tears. After a moment of silence, the audience burst into earth-shattering cheers and exclamations. Hundreds of thousands of people cheered in unison and discussed excitedly. The terrifying sound wave torrent caused the entire plaza to tremble. Oh my God! Am I hallucinating? What the hell? Tang Yu was instackled. Who is that beautiful and strong woman? How can she be so powerful? Oh my God! Tang Yu, the little overlord of the Darkblood County, was instackled by a woman with one punch. Hee hee. That's why I said don't act cool in front of everyone. You'll only be cool for a second. Tang Yu is usually very dissolute. Now he has suffered a big setback. Let's see how he can attract bees and butterflies in the future. There was a lot of discussion in the square. The dignitaries and experts on the 4 viewing platforms were also whispering to each other, inquiring about Zhen Hong's identity. On the ceremony platform, the third prince came back to his senses and grinned proudly. Although his smile was a bit silly. After all, he was also frightened. He guessed that after Zhen Hong's bloodline awakened, his strength. But he didn't expect him to be so strong. Oh, this was a completely different person. Is this the same Zhen Hong? The second prince's face darkened. He frowned and the corner of his mouth twitched. Third prince, you're so cunning. His heart ached because Tang Yu was one of his confidants that he had secretly trained. The third prince said proudly, beaming with joy, this is called wisdom. Do you know how to play the pig to eat the tiger? You are a pig to begin with. Do you still need to pretend to be one? The second prince glared at him. At this time, Tang Yu left the arena awkwardly. Zhen Hong also held back her tears and flew back to Ji Tianxing. She didn't sit down, but bowed deeply to Ji Tianxing. 2 sparkling teardrops rolled down from the corners of her eyes and landed on Ji Tianxing's body. This scene caused the dignitaries on the viewing platforms to discuss and speculate in private. Ji Tianxing took her arm, pressed her to the seat beside him, and asked, so many people are watching. What are you doing? Why are you crying? Thank you, young master. Zhen Hong reached out to wipe her tears, but she couldn't stop them from flowing down again. You were right. The power of the Dragon Clan's unique skill is beyond my imagination. In the past few hundred years, I never dared to imagine that I could be so powerful. It was you who helped me awaken my bloodline and give me a new life. I'm no longer the Zhen Hong of the past. Seeing her so sad, Ji Tianxing subconsciously reached out his hand, wanting to pat her shoulder and comfort her. But it wasn't high enough. Forget it. I'll just take my hand back. Next, 5 more matches were carried out in the arena. At this point, the first round of the competition was over. 76 geniuses advanced, and the other half were eliminated. The third prince loudly announced the list of those who advanced and allowed everyone to rest for an hour before continuing the second round of the competition. During this period, the people who advanced didn't dare to be distracted. They seized the time to circulate their energy and take pills to recover their strength. Zhen Hong wasn't injured, and she didn't use much divine power. After all, she wasn't mentally prepared for the battle to end. Therefore, she still listened to Ji Tianxing's arrangement and continued to review the 18 unique skills of the Dragon Clan. She was thinking in her heart. Which unique skill should she use in the next round? Just as she was thinking over and over again and couldn't make up her mind, Ji Tianxing made the final decision. You're still using that dragon shadow palm. If you can defeat your opponent in one move, there's no need to drag it out until the second move. Also, don't expose your trump cards so easily. Zhenhong came to a sudden realization and hurriedly nodded to express her understanding. Soon, the second round of the competition began. The second prince drew lots again, and 38 pairs were selected from the 76 young geniuses. This time, Zhenhong was placed in the 37th match. Ji Tianxing was a little depressed. He frowned and muttered, "What kind of bad luck is this? I'm actually placed in the second last match. What's wrong, young master?" Zhenhong was puzzled. Ji Tianxing explained, "Today's competition isn't good. If you go on stage earlier, we can leave after the competition." Zhenhong was taken aback for a moment before nodding in agreement. "That's true. If we wait until it's dark, we'll delay your rest." She thought for a moment and asked, "Young master, why don't you go back and rest first?" "I'll go back after the competition." "No need, I'll wait." Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "You continue to consolidate your foundation of the divine Tao. I'm going to take a nap." With that, he reclined on the chair and closed his eyes to take a nap. Zhenhong didn't dare to disturb him. He could only silently adjust his breathing and work hard to consolidate his foundation. Ji Tianxing appeared to be taking a nap, but he was actually observing Prince Lian and the reaction in the palace. The fifth prince's men were crippled, and the experts and forces under his command had also collapsed. This was a huge blow to Prince Lian's plan. He already had a premonition that Prince Lian would soon make a move against him. In addition, the fifth prince was beaten to such a state. 2 days had passed, and the king must know the whole story. But what made him feel strange was that the king didn't react at all when his youngest son was beaten to such a state. Wasn't this too strange? Even if there was a reason, the fifth prince's injuries and poisoning were his own fault. But the king was the same as the top experts. He only recognized who had the bigger fist and didn't care about reason. The king pretended that nothing had happened, which made him more vigilant. Chapter 3041. Time passed very quickly. At dusk, it was finally Zhenhong's turn to take the stage to compete. Young geniuses who could enter the second round of the grand competition were basically all middle-level divine lords. Occasionally, there were a few low-level divine lords, but they were also peak third-stage realm and grasped special secret techniques. Zhenhong's luck was not too good. Her opponent was stronger than Tang Yu. Not only did his strength reach peak fourth-stage divine lord realm, but he also grasped several powerful divine abilities and ultimate skills. Furthermore, this ordinary-looking young man was a trusted aide groomed by the fifth prince. The two people fought on the stage. The young man did not show any mercy, going all out the moment he made his move. But the outcome was destined long ago. Zhenhong used her full strength once again, executing that dragon shadow palm. Golden dragon claws that filled the sky slammed down, releasing a power that could obliterate heaven and earth. The divine art light shadow that the other party executed, the divine Tao laws released, all disintegrated under the dragon claws. Boom, 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 boom. The young man's divine ability was destroyed, and he was sent flying back. However, his injuries were not as miserable as Tang Yu's. After landing, he spat out a mouthful of blood and could still continue fighting. Seeing this scene, Zhenhong had no choice but to use the second dragon race's ultimate skill. Dragon Elephant Divine Fists. Following her angry roar, both fists ruthlessly struck out endless golden light, condensing into a mountain-sized dragon elephant phantom. This divine ability secret technique was exactly the same as the Dragon Elephant Divine Fist executed by Ji Tianxing. The difference was that the Dragon Elephant Divine Fist executed by Zhenhong could not be mentioned in the same breath as Ji Tianxing. It looked the same on the surface, but the power was 10 times worse. But it was more than enough to defeat that young man. Boom! Crack! Amidst a shocking loud noise, the young man's divine ability was defeated. He was blasted out again, rolling and smashing at the edge of the stage. If not for the sky blue light shield blocking, he would have long been blasted flying to the plaza. This time, He lay on the ground with blood spurting out of his 7 orifices. He groaned in pain a few times and hurriedly admitted defeat. Fortunately, he admitted defeat in time. Zhenhong accumulated her full strength again, preparing the next ultimate skill. If he had been a moment later, he would have been beaten to a pulp by Zhenhong. Zhenhong only used 2 moves to easily win again. The square was once again in an uproar. Countless commoners cried out in shock and disbelief. The dignitaries and experts on the viewing platform also found it hard to believe. After these 2 battles, Zhenhong had become the most dazzling genius powerhouse present, attracting everyone's attention. Countless people were still talking about her even after the 38 Elders competition had ended. After that, the 3rd prince announced the list of those who had been promoted. A total of 38 geniuses had advanced and were qualified to participate in the 3rd round of the competition tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, they would compete with the top 30 geniuses in the arena. Today's competition had come to an end, and the people on the viewing platform left one after another. The commoners in the square also quickly dispersed. Ji Tianxing and Zhenhong were just about to get up and leave when he noticed a sharp gaze staring at him from the eastern viewing platform. It was as if there was a thorn in his back, making him very uncomfortable. He turned his head and saw that in the middle of the eastern viewing platform, Prince Lian was staring at him coldly. On the left and right sides of Prince Lian, there were 4 young experts. There were 3 men and 1 woman, all of whom were god monarchs of the 5th or 6th stage. Their brows were filled with an unruly aura. The 4 young geniuses were also coldly sizing him and Zhenhong up, not hiding their hostility at all. Ji Tianxing glanced at the 4 people, turned around expressionlessly, and left with Zhenhong. On the way back to Longwind Courtyard, Ji Tianxing sat in a luxurious carriage with Zhenhong standing beside him. After a moment of silence, Zhenhong asked, "Young master, that black-robed youth seems to have a deep hatred for you." The 4 young experts beside him also had strong enmity towards us. I guess that the 4 of them are also going to participate in the arena competition. Moreover, they should be the same as you. They are all in the top 30. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly with a look of approval. Your observation is very careful, and your analysis is also very correct. That's right. The black-robed youth is Prince Lian, and he is coming for me. As for the 4 young geniuses, they are all elites under his command. In tomorrow's arena competition, they will definitely attack us. If you meet them at that time, you must deal with them carefully. Don't let your guard down. Zhenhong nodded to show that he understood and said worriedly, I have heard of Prince Lian's name several times. He seems to be from the imperial family of the great Yang Empire. Young master, how did you provoke such a strong enemy? The other party hates you so much. Do you want to ask His Majesty to mediate? The matter between the 5th prince and Prince Lian was top secret, so Zhenhong certainly did not know. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, there is nothing to mediate. You don't have to worry. I have my own countermeasures. Prince Lian is playing tricks in the arena competition, so there is nothing to worry about. Let's just rely on our own strength. What we really need to worry about is that after the divine blood ceremony, he will secretly play tricks. After a while, the carriage returned to the Changfeng courtyard. As soon as Ji Tianxing and Zhenhong got out of the carriage, the guard at the door hurriedly came to report the news. Young master, Miss Ning has arrived and is waiting for you in the study. Ji Tianxing was startled for a moment. Then, he raised his eyebrows and his calm eyes softened a little. Okay, I know. Seiji nodded and brought Masahiro through the door to the study. Zhenhong certainly knew that the Miss Ning mentioned by the guard was Princess Ning's niece, the first Miss Ning of Qianxue County. She was keenly aware that when Ji Tianxing heard the news, his eyes and mood eased a lot. When they were halfway there, Ji Tianxing looked back at her and said, You must be tired after 2 rounds today. You don't have to follow me anymore. Go back and rest. Tomorrow is the real fierce battle. You should consolidate your foundation tonight. Zhenhong reflexively wanted to nod his head and say yes. But she hesitated for a moment and shook her head. Thank you for your concern, young master. Zhenhong is not tired. It's Zhenhong's duty to serve you. Ji Tianxing didn't say much and just let her be. Soon, They arrived at the study. As soon as they stepped into the study, they saw an elegant beauty in a light green dress sitting at the desk and reading quietly. Under the warm gemstone light, her profile was quite beautiful and elegant. According to the aesthetics of the Bloodfire divine country, she was absolutely a beautiful woman. "Miss Ning, you are late." Ji Tianxing walked towards her and greeted her with a faint smile on his face. Ning Xiyuan woke up with a start. She quickly put down the book, stood up and bowed. "Greetings, young Master Tianxing. Sit down and talk." Ji Tianxing walked to the desk and sat down, facing Ning Xiyuan. Ning Xiyuan glanced at Zhenhong and asked, "Young Master, is this your personal maid?" Chapter 3042. Ji Tianxing didn't have much of a reaction. When Zhenhong heard those words, her heart skipped a beat and she was a little embarrassed. But she didn't utter a word, hoping that Ji Tianxing would answer yes. But Ji Tianxing's answer disappointed her. "What personal maid? Miss Ning must be joking." Ji Tianxing shook his head and explained, "She's called Zhenhong, the leader of the maids in Changfeng Courtyard." "I see." Ning Xiyuan nodded slightly, finally understanding the situation. Although she had been to Royal City many times before, but every time she visited her aunt, Princess Ning, she stayed in the third prince's residence and had never been to Changfeng Courtyard. So, she didn't know Zhenhong. Ji Tianxing asked unintentionally, "I heard from the third prince that every time you come, you stay in the prince's residence. Why did you come to Changfeng Courtyard? Why are you looking for me?" Ning Xiyuan shook her head and said, "I've already visited my aunt. Every time I stay in the prince's residence, I'm already bored. Since you're staying in Changfeng Courtyard, of course I have to come here. It's more convenient." Ji Tianxing didn't think much and asked about her cultivation situation. Zhenhong listened silently and a little scheme popped up in her heart. "Young Master lives here, Miss Ning also lives here. More convenient. What does that mean? What's more convenient? Could it be that between young Master and Miss Ning, there's really..." At this time, Ning Xiyuan said, "Thanks to young Master's help, my pain has been relieved. After taking the pill you gave me, my bloodline and innate talent had a qualitative leap. Not long ago, I broke through to the monarch god realm and now my foundation is stable. I have a premonition that in less than a year, I will be able to advance to the second degree realm." Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "This is called good preparation. Ning's bloodline is a quasi-king bloodline, but because of the existence of Heavenly Slayer, it suppressed your innate talent and potential. Now that Heavenly Slayer has been lifted, your accumulated potential for many years will be released and your strength will definitely increase explosively." Ning Xiyuan continued, "It's a pity that I was still a step too late even though I rushed over. I just arrived in the capital today. After visiting Auntie, the arena tournament is almost over." Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, "It is indeed a pity. If you had come a few days earlier, you could have signed up and tested your strength." Ning Xiyuan hurriedly waved his hands and said modestly, "Don't laugh at me, young master. If I participate in the competition with this bit of strength, I will only embarrass myself in front of everyone. I won't be able to make it in time for this year's ceremony. I can only wait 50 years before I try again." The two of them chatted back and forth, talking about things that could be big or small. Zhenhong stood quietly to the side and listened for a long time. Through their conversation, she gradually understood the relationship between Ji Tianxing and Ning Xiyuan. Only now did she know that Ji Tianxing had not only helped her awaken her bloodline, he had also helped the Ning clan resolve the bloodline defect. He had also given the Ning clan a new lease of life. This made Zhenhong very shocked. She thought to herself, who exactly is young master? He actually has such unfathomable means. Previously, I thought that young master was interested in me and deliberately helped me awaken my bloodline. Now, it seems that I was thinking too much. Young master has always been straightforward and upright. He is good at helping others and does not ask for anything in return. To us, it is a great opportunity that can turn our lives upside down and be reborn. But to him, it's just a trivial matter that he can do casually. The more Zhenhong thought about it, the more she felt that Ji Tianxing was unfathomable. He was so mysterious that she could not see through him. But the more it was so, the more she rejoiced. To be able to meet Ji Tianxing was truly a blessing of 3 lifetimes. At the same time, she secretly made up her mind to follow Ji Tianxing no matter what. Even if she followed him to the ends of the world and wandered the 4 seas, it would be a great blessing. Unknowingly, 2 hours passed. After Ji Tianxing and Ning Xiyuan finished chatting, he said goodbye and good night and prepared to rest. Zhenhong also tactfully retreated and returned to her residence to meditate and adjust her breath. The night was silent. Changfeng courtyard was quiet and peaceful. Early the next morning, the sun had just risen. Zhenhong finished meditating. After washing up, she went to serve Ji Tianxing to get up. Unexpectedly, as soon as she walked to Ji Tianxing's residence, she saw that Ji Tianxing had already finished washing up and was leisurely eating breakfast with Ning Xiyuan in the living room. Ah, Miss Ning is even earlier than me. Zhenhong paused and thought to herself, young master basically does not eat, and Changfeng courtyard has never prepared breakfast. Those breakfast dishes are so exquisite and delicious. Did Miss Ning make them herself? Why is Miss Ning more dutiful than me, a maid? Thinking of this, Zhenhong's expression was a little uneasy, and there was a little uneasiness in her heart. But she herself did not understand the source of the uneasiness. At this time, Ji Tianxing saw her enter the living room, so he waved and said, Zhenhong, come and taste Miss Ning's cooking. These snacks are all made with the best ingredients, which can benefit the qi, nourish the spirit, and condense the soul. Ning Xiyuan also looked at her calmly and did not speak. A rich and powerful family like the Ning family had a deep-rooted concept of superiority and inferiority. Maids and servants were not qualified to sit at the same table with their masters, let alone eat at the same table. But since Ji Tianxing had spoken, Ning Xiyuan naturally did not stop him and just kept silent. Zhenhong quickly bowed and greeted the two, then said, young master and Miss Ning, please enjoy. Zhenhong does not dare to break the rules, so I will retreat outside. After saying that, she bowed and was about to leave. This was the attitude a maid should have. Ning Xiyuan withdrew her gaze, reached out and picked up a piece of pastry, and put it in Ji Tianxing's bowl. Young master, please concentrate on eating. You have to participate in the arena competition later. Ji Tianxing did not answer. He reached out and grabbed Zhenhong and pulled her to sit beside him. Hurry up and finish eating. Don't waste time. Zhenhong's wrist was held by him, but she could not use any strength and could not resist at all. Even if she sat down, she felt as if she was sitting on pins and needles, and her heart was uneasy. Ning Xiyuan frowned slightly and looked deeply at Ji Tianxing and Zhenhong. As intelligent as she was, of course, she saw some subtle problems. But she kept her composure and ate in silence. This breakfast passed in an awkward and subtle atmosphere. A quarter of an hour later, Ji Tianxing took Ning Xiyuan and Zhenhong in a carriage and left Changfeng courtyard for the square in the city. When the 3 of them went to the northern viewing platform, almost all the people on the 4 viewing platforms had arrived. The huge square was crowded with nearly 1 million Protoss people, and there was a hubbub of voices. Not long after, the 2nd prince and the 3rd prince arrived. The 2 of them went to the ceremonial platform and announced that the arena competition would continue. Next, the drawing of lots for the 3rd round of the tournament began. There were a total of 68 young geniuses in this round of the tournament. The 3rd prince threw out 68 jade slips, which flew back and forth in the sky and formed a golden ball of light. The 2nd prince waved his hand and shot out beams of divine light, constantly drawing out pairs of jade slips. Then, he announced the list of matches one by one. Zhenhong was scheduled to fight in the 7th match, while Ji Tianxing was scheduled to fight in the last match. Chapter 3043. The young geniuses who could enter the 3rd round of the tournament were all powerhouses. Most of them were the 2nd prince and the 5th prince's trusted aides. Zhenhong's opponent was one of the young powerhouses under the 5th prince's command. Ji Tianxing's opponent was one of the 2nd prince's trusted aides, a seeded contestant whom the 2nd prince had high hopes for. Originally, the 2nd prince had planned to place more importance on this young genius after he entered the top 10 and was baptized by the Bloodflame Sacred Tree. But now, it seemed that his luck was too bad. When he announced the battle between Ji Tianxing and Lu Kongyang, His heart was bleeding and his face was as cold as ice. Needless to say, even he could not defeat Ji Tianxing. How could Lu Kongyang be a match for Ji Tianxing? He would definitely be ground to the ground. After reading the name list, the second prince put down the jade slip with a dark face. Glancing at the third prince beside him, the second prince frowned when he saw the smirk on the third prince's face and the gloating look on his face. Why are you so happy? Lu Kongyang is not the only trusted aide I've trained. The third prince smiled and said telepathically, Lu Kongyang has been eliminated in this round. What about the next round? What about the next round? Hee. With Tianxing's strength and means, he's just a noob in the tournament. It just depends on who's unlucky enough to become his stepping stones. The second prince's eyes twitched and he said hatefully, why did you let him participate in the tournament? Isn't this unnecessary? Just use your connections and let him be baptized by the sacred tree. It's not that difficult. The third prince retorted righteously, second brother, you're wrong. Am I the kind of person who plays favoritism? Moreover, young Master Tianxing is righteous, confident, and proud. Why would he use such a method to be baptized by the sacred tree? Hee. The second prince rolled his eyes and sneered at him. He did not say anything else. At the same time, on the northern viewing platform, Ji Tianxing, Ning Xiyuan, and Zhen Hong were discussing in low voices. The young geniuses participating in this round are all the top geniuses in the Divine Kingdom. If I'm not wrong, most of these people are the confidants of the princes, and they're secretly cultivating their forces. Don't worry, young master. Master didn't arrange much. If there really is a genius secretly nurtured by the master, I should be able to recognize him. Young Master Tianxing, there's no need to worry. You just have to fight with all your might. Your goal is to win the championship, so you'll have to eliminate a lot of geniuses. Ji Tianxing sat in the middle, Ning Xiyuan sat on the left, and Zhen Hong sat on the right. The two women were both beauties that could topple cities, yet they were hugging Ji Tianxing in a very intimate manner. This aroused the envy and jealousy of countless people, and they secretly criticized him countless times. Coincidentally, the second prince, Duanmu Xiong, was also there. How could he miss such a grand divine blood ceremony? He had been here the day before and watched the whole day. Moreover, he was a relative of the royal family, so he was also sitting on the northern viewing platform. His seat was not far from Ji Tianxing. They were only 3 rows apart, less than 100 feet away. Therefore, he could clearly see every move of Ji Tianxing, Zhen Hong, and Ning Xiyuan. Even when the 3 of them were whispering to each other, their intimate expressions and actions did not escape his eyes. Yesterday, Duanmu Xiong had been shown off for the whole day. He had watched Ji Tianxing and Zhen Hong being all lovey-dovey. Today, it was even worse. Not only Zhen Hong, but even Ning Xiyuan had come. The 2 women sandwiched Ji Tianxing in the middle, showing off their affection for each other throughout the whole process. Duanmu Xiong was restless. His face was pale, and he glared at the 3 of them fiercely. His chest was burning with jealousy. However, the most infuriating thing was that Ji Tianxing and the other 2 were still as before, completely ignoring his existence. To Duanmu Xiong, this was the greatest humiliation. He had completely lost the mood to watch the battle. His eyes were fixed on Ji Tianxing, Zhen Hong, and Ning Xiyuan. The angrier he was, the more he wanted to stare at them. However, the more he stared, the more his jealousy burned. Not long after, Zhen Hong went up the stage to compete. This time, she used 3 moves to defeat her opponent. The audience cheered thunderously, and she became the focus of the audience again. When she returned to the viewing platform and sat down, Ji Tianxing actually whispered something in her ear. She did not know what they were talking about. Zhen Hong nodded repeatedly, as if he was shy, or as if he was thinking about something. When Duanmu Xiong saw this, he was so angry that his chest rose and fell rapidly. His eyes were almost red. Bastard! What a shameless bastard! In broad daylight, in front of millions of people, he has no sense of shame and is whispering sweet nothings to Zhen Hong. Ning Xiyuan, oh Ning Xiyuan, are you blind? The 2 of them are right beside you, being intimate in front of you. How can you stand it? Duanmu Xiong was filled with grief and indignation as he roared in his heart. He really could not understand how Ji Tianxing had managed to win the favor of Ning Xiyuan and Zhen Hong. The most bizarre thing was that the two women were with him at the same time, and nothing happened. Duanmu Xiong did not even dare to dream of this kind of happiness. However, Ji Tianxing had done it. His jealousy and hatred for Ji Tianxing had reached an uncontrollable level. At this moment, a young aristocrat beside him noticed that his emotions were in turmoil. He could not help but ask, "Second Prince, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" The young aristocrat was dressed in a white robe and held a folding fan in his hand. He was dressed like a dashing prince. His name was Jeluo, and he was the son of the general of the south. He was one of the top nobles in Monarch City and was very close to Duanmu Xiong. Duanmu Xiong quickly suppressed his anger and forced himself to remain calm. He said, "It's nothing. I just couldn't help but feel my blood boiling when I saw how exciting their fight was." Jeluo secretly sent a telepathic message and said with a playful smile, "Is that so? Isn't it because you saw that nobody sitting on two peerless beauties and felt indignant?" Duanmu Xiong was stunned. He turned to look at him and asked, "Brother Jeluo, do you feel the same way?" "Of course." Jeluo waved his fan out of habit and sighed. "Sigh. Noble young masters like you and me, who are of noble status and outstanding talents, can't even win the favor of the beauties. Instead, it's those despicable scoundrels who used some dirty tricks to win the hearts of the beauties. What's wrong with this world? Are we too pure and not shameless enough?" Duanmu Xiong nodded in agreement. He said angrily, "Yes, it's all our fault for being too gentlemanly and being restricted by so many rules. On the other hand, those bastards who were born lowly and had dirty means would resort to any means to please the beautiful woman. The funniest thing is that he has to curry favor with the beauties to have the right to do so. Otherwise, he would be like those lowly commoners, crowding in the public square with millions of people and looking up at us like a toad." Jeluo could hear the hatred in his voice. He looked at Ji Tianxing and the other two with a playful gaze. Then, he raised his eyebrows at Duanmu Xiong and sent a telepathic message to instigate him. "Since you hate him so much, why don't you kill him? Do you still want to watch him walk in front of you?" Chapter 3044. Duanmu Xiong was stunned for a moment before he shook his head with dim eyes. "I can't defeat him." Not only could he not defeat him, but he was also completely defeated. Moreover, there were still remnants of the poison in his body that had yet to be removed. Even the tool to carry on his ancestral line had only grown out recently and had yet to fully recover. Whenever he thought of that incident, the shadow in his heart would grow infinitely. Jeluo waved his folding fan again and chuckled. "The weak work hard, the weak work hard, and the strong work hard. Second Prince, there's no need for proud sons like you and me to do it personally." Duanmu Xiong frowned and said gloomily, "I also want to hire a strong man to kill him, but I don't meet his requirements." Previously, he was willing to spend 30 billion to hire the Evil Blood Palace to assassinate Ji Tianxing. However, the Evil Blood Palace was unwilling and wanted to add the furious blood sacred tree. That was the most precious treasure of the prince's residence. He did not dare to trade it. Jeluo patted his shoulder and chuckled. "Second Prince, a man should repay kindness and revenge as he pleases. Don't be timid, or you'll only be wronging yourself. Just like now, you can only stare and sulk as you watch that brat take away the woman you like. Money and treasures are just worldly possessions. As long as you can vent your anger and make yourself happy, just do it. You're the crown prince of the divine nation and the second grandson of the monarch. Don't you think it's too ridiculous?" Jeluo was a hedonistic son. He usually drank and went to brothels with Duanmu Xiong. They were so close that they shared a pair of pants. Therefore, he casually blurted out these taboo words. Duanmu Xiong fell silent. He stared at his feet with his head lowered and struggled internally. Jeluo transmitted his voice again. "These are my heartfelt words. This is what I do. That's why I can live a carefree life. In the past, there was a son of a princess who wanted to snatch the top courtesan from me. He even wanted to use underhanded means. I didn't say anything and sent someone to kill him that very night. Things got out of hand. My father's salary was deducted for 100 years and he was scolded by the monarch. I was beaten half to death by my father and locked up for 10 years. But so what? Now that I've vented my anger and felt good, I won't regret it anymore. Then, he patted Duan Muxiong's shoulder and said earnestly, "Second prince, think about it carefully." "Yes." Duan Muxiong replied without even raising his head. After a long time, when he raised his head, his gaze had become firm, and there was no longer any struggle or hesitation in his heart. After an entire 4 hours, this round of the competition finally came to an end. The final battle began. A tall and sturdy young man in black armor with a broad back flew into the arena. This was a member of the Bloodflame divine race. He was over 3 meters tall and had a head full of purple hair. His entire body exuded a valiant aura. He stood proudly in the ring with his arms crossed in front of his chest. His face was expressionless. The Protoss in the square immediately cheered and shouted. Many of them began to whisper to each other and discuss the situation. "It's Xue Bufan. He's finally here. The 5th hero of the 10 heroes of the Monarch City, the best of the younger generation. The last time he showed himself was 2 years ago. Now that he's here again, he seems to be even stronger than before. I wonder who his opponent is. He's so unlucky and pitiful. I remember his name seems to be Tianxing. Why haven't I heard of this name before? That's right. This person has never fought on the arena before. He must be a backdoor entrant who's been internally selected to be in the top 30. TSK, TSK, TSK. Tianxing will be brutally beaten by Xue Bufan later. He'll be defeated in 3 to 5 moves. Won't that be a slap to the faces of those nobles? Just as everyone was discussing, Ji Tianxing stood up from the spectator stand. Zhen Hong looked at him and said with a smile, "Be careful, young master." Ning Xiyuan also reminded, "Young master Tianxing, don't be too anxious to end the battle. It's most important to preserve your strength." Ji Tianxing nodded and stepped into the sky, landing on the arena. His appearance caused the people in the square to discuss even more enthusiastically. "That kid is Tianxing, Xue Bufan's opponent. He's actually from another race. He looks ordinary. He's definitely not Xue Bufan's opponent. That kid came out from the northern viewing platform. Could it be that his backer is a relative of the royal family? Who cares who his backer is? The arena competition relies on strength. He'll be beaten down later and leave the arena in humiliation." The commoners despised people like Ji Tianxing, who relied on his connections to participate in the arena competition. The commoners despised him the most. In fact, for some reason, countless people had a common enemy and treated him as an enemy. Hundreds of thousands of people were shouting, hoping that Xue Bufan would ruthlessly beat Ji Tianxing and make him lose face. Only in this way could the people vent their anger. This was also another way for the people to fight back against those high and mighty nobles. On the arena, Ji Tianxing and Xue Bufan stood 1,000 feet apart. Xue Bufan looked at him coldly and said proudly, "I'm Xue Bufan, one of the 10 heroes of the royal city. My master is the leader of the Qianji sect." Ji Tianxing had a smile at the corner of his mouth. After listening to him, he said, "And then?" Xue Bufan frowned and said with a sneer, "You're called Tianxing, right? I've never heard of your name, and I don't know where you came from. Although you relied on some connections to enter the predetermined list and directly participate in this round of the competition. But I want to remind you that in the arena competition, swords and sabers have no eyes. Don't put on airs. If you don't want to be seriously injured and lose face, admit defeat now." Ji Tianxing's smile became even wider and asked, "Are you done?" Xue Bufan's sneer became even more intense as he said contemptuously, "What? You're not willing to accept it? You talk too much nonsense." Ji Tianxing shook his head and finally lost his patience. As his voice fell, he raised his right hand like lightning and slashed at Xue Bufan. Swoosh. It was a very ordinary palm and did not use any magical skills. However, that 100-feet palm shadow that cut through the sky contained more than 30 kinds of power of laws. Its speed was as fast as an aurora, its power could destroy heaven and earth, and its momentum was like the sky collapsing and the earth sinking. In that instant, the space of the entire arena froze. Shui Bufan was suppressed by the invisible divine power, and his body stiffened on the spot. His expression was stunned, and his eyes were wide open, revealing a look of deep horror. However, his hand held the hilt of the sword, but it was too late to draw the sword. Boom! A deafening loud sound burst out. The 100 feet large golden palm shadow slammed into Shui Bufan, exploding with dazzling light that filled the sky. Among them, there was also a purple flower of blood mixed in. Shui Bufan flew 20,000 feet backward, slamming into the sky blue shield, and fell to the ground with a bang. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of black blood. His eyes closed a few times, and then slowly closed. He fainted on the spot. The battle was over. The boisterous square instantly fell silent. Everyone had a dull face, staring at Ji Tianxing in horror, as if they had seen a ghost. The two princes on the ceremony stage had long expected this result. The third prince was full of smiles and in high spirits. The second prince looked depressed and couldn't help but sigh. Shui Bufan, this bastard, why are you talking so much nonsense? Shut up now, right? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3045. This round of the competition was over. Another 34 young geniuses were eliminated on the spot. The second prince had suffered heavy losses, and his expression did not look too good. Similarly, many of the trusted geniuses that the fifth prince had secretly nurtured were also eliminated. After an hour of rest, the fourth round of the competition began. It was close to noon, and the sun was shining brightly in the sky. However, the nearly 1 million people in the square were patiently watching and discussing the battles. No one left early. Everyone knew that the young geniuses who could advance to this stage were the best of the younger generation. The following battles would be more and more exciting. Not to mention the scorching sun in the sky, even if the sky was raining knives, they would still watch the entire competition. On the ceremony stage, the third prince took out 34 jade slips, and the second prince drew lots to announce the battle list. The names of the 34 young geniuses were read out one by one. Of course, the names of Ji Tianxing and Zhen Hong were included. Coincidentally, Ji Tianxing was the first to fight. His opponent was Bai Hao, who was also one of the 10 heroes of the royal city. Not only did this person come from a prominent family, but he was also talented. Moreover, he was the backbone of the second prince's faction, and also a trusted subordinate that the second prince had specially nurtured. When the second prince announced the battle list, the names of these two people were like a blow to his head, and his face immediately collapsed. At that moment, he wished he could chop off his hands, and roared angrily in his heart, "Damn, can I still keep my hands? What kind of bad luck is this?" First, Shui Bufan was crushed, and now Bai Hao is also going to be eliminated. These two people are elites who will definitely enter the top 10. Why am I so unlucky? Tianxing, you really are this king's jinx. The second prince was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood, but the third prince smiled even more brightly. He pretended to comfort the second prince. "Second prince, my condolences. It can't be helped, the trusted subordinates that you and the fifth prince have nurtured are all top geniuses. Now, 70% of the 34 geniuses are your people. Therefore, the chances of them bumping into Tianxing are too high. But I don't have such worries. After all, I only arranged 9 people, and 4 have already been eliminated. With only 5 people left, it's still very difficult to bump into Tianxing." The second prince pretended not to hear him and continued to draw lots to announce the list of matches. When he read the 15th match, his furrowed brows relaxed a little. The two sides of this battle were Zhen Hong and Yuewu City. He was also a famous peak genius in Yuewu City. Furthermore, he was a famous figure of the younger generation under the fifth prince. His talent, strength, and means were not far from Bai Hao's. The second prince felt slightly comforted as he thought to himself, "Fortunately, it was Old Fifth's men. This prince has suffered heavy losses, so Old Fifth won't have it easy either." Zhen Hong was also amazing. In the past, she was so ordinary that no one would pay attention to her. However, after hanging out with Tianxing for a few days, she had actually undergone an earth-shattering change, becoming a top-notch genius in a single leap. The limelight of this grand ceremony has been completely stolen by the two of them. Soon, the list of names was announced, and the battle began. A tall and sturdy young man in luxurious clothes flew out from the northern viewing platform. His figure landed gracefully on the arena. He was none other than Bai Hao. He held a black scabbard saber in his left hand, and his right hand hung by his side. He stared at the ground expressionlessly. If his opponent was someone else, he would definitely be in high spirits and full of fighting spirit. Unfortunately, he knew that his opponent was Tianxing, and his heart sank. When Tianxing was fighting Xue Bufan, he had severely injured Xue Bufan and knocked him out with one move. Bai Hao had seen the entire process clearly from the viewing platform. He asked himself honestly, if he were Xue Bufan, he would not be able to change the outcome either. He would still end up the same way. He had even heard of Tianxing's name before the divine blood ceremony. After all, he was the second prince's trusted aide. In the past, Tianxing had gone against the second prince and killed Princess Tianfeng and many monarch god experts. Bai Hao knew about this. Therefore, he was feeling very complicated at this moment. In the end, he could only sigh with emotion. Damn it, why am I so unlucky to encounter a plague like him? When he muttered this sentence, a white figure flashed in front of him. Tianxing also flew across the sky and landed on the arena, standing 1,000 feet away from him. Bai Hao looked up with a gloomy face, and his eyes were vigilant and alert. Tianxing looked at him with a faint smile and said, "Looking at you, you must have guessed the result. Why don't you admit defeat now and save me the trouble?" Bai Hao's mouth twitched, and his eyes became even more malicious. He shouted in a deep voice, "Win without a fight. Don't even think about it. I, Bai Hao, am one of the 10 heroes of King City. I am famous in the city and idolized by countless young Protoss. How can I admit defeat without a fight in front of so many people? Don't I care about my face and reputation?" After hearing this, Tianxing nodded seriously and said, "Well, your analysis is quite reasonable. In this case, I can only beat you until you admit defeat. At that time, you will be seriously injured, and like Xue Bufan, you will need at least 8 to 10 years to recover." Bai Hao frowned. After hesitating for a moment, he growled with a firm expression, "Even so, I will do my best to withstand at least 2 moves. I can withstand 1 more move than Xue Bufan, which proves that I am stronger than him." Tianxing smiled and said, "You are ambitious. Then take this." After that, he slowly raised his right hand and clenched his fist to gather his momentum. Suddenly, a strong wind blew in the arena, and an invisible divine power surged wantonly. When a mountain-sized golden fist shadow appeared, the entire space in the arena froze. The great divine power suppressed Bai Hao, making his body bent and difficult to breathe. Large beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. But he gritted his teeth and held on. His right hand held the hilt of his sword, and his eyes stared at Tianxing, showing an incomparably tenacious will. He watched as Tianxing raised his right fist and was about to punch him. At the critical moment, Bai Hao's eyes flashed with hesitation. Finally, he gritted his teeth and shouted in a low voice, "Stop. I admit defeat." Tianxing's fist was halfway out, but he had to stop. He looked at Bai Hao with a puzzled expression. "Didn't you have a backbone just now? Why did you change your mind in the blink of an eye?" Bai Hao replied expressionlessly, "Knowing that you are no match for him, you still insist on holding on. That's not courage, that's stupidity." Tianxing frowned and asked again, "Didn't you say that you want to withstand 2 moves to prove that you are stronger than Xue Bufan?" Bai Hao replied with a dark face, "In the same situation where you made a move, he was seriously injured and unconscious, but I was unharmed. It turns out that I am still stronger." Tianxing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He asked through voice transmission, "Your master is the second prince, right?" Bai Hao was stunned for a moment and asked in confusion, "How do you know?" All these years, he had never exposed his faction. He had always been secretly helping the second prince. Logically speaking, Tianxing shouldn't have known. Tianxing revealed a meaningful smile. "If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. Your shamelessness is really the same." Chapter 3046. If it were anyone else who humiliated the second prince like this, Bai Hao would have beaten them up. However, the other party was Ji Tianxing. He could only suppress his anger and pretend that he did not hear anything. There was no other way. He could not beat him. Goodbye. He cupped his hands expressionlessly and flew away without hesitation. Ji Tianxing felt that it was meaningless. He curled his lips and flew back to the viewing platform. The nearly 1 million God Clan citizens in the square were all confused and had dumbfounded expressions. Many people whispered to each other, asking and discussing. What's going on? That's it. What a scam. That Bai Hao admitted defeat just as Tianxing was about to make a move. Did he pee his pants because of Tianxing's aura? Or did they already fight with their divine souls? Xue Bufan was defeated in one move. Bai Hao is not much stronger. It's natural for him to admit defeat. But isn't he too spineless? Xue Bufan took one move. He should be more manly when he lost. Yeah. Bai Hao surrendered without a fight. He was overwhelmed by Tianxing's aura. How cowardly does that sound? The people found it difficult to understand Bai Hao's actions. They were even more curious about Ji Tianxing. However, the second prince on the ceremony platform nodded secretly. A look of relief flashed in his eyes. Finally, there's a smart one. He's not as dumb as Xue Bufan. If he were to be sent up and knocked out by Tianxing, I would have one less lackey in the next few years. Soon, the second battle began. The two young geniuses went up to the arena. They fought until the sky darkened and divine light filled the sky. After a quarter of an hour, the winner was decided. They left the arena one after another. The third battle began. Ji Tianxing was not interested in watching the battle. He was whispering to Ning Xiyuan to help her solve her doubts. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of the two figures in the arena. One of them was a thin young man with a head of white hair. This immediately piqued his interest. He observed the battle expressionlessly. Zhen Hong, who was beside him, also stared at the arena with a serious expression, carefully watching the battle. Ning Xiyuan was somewhat puzzled and asked via voice transmission, "Young Master Tianxing, didn't you say you weren't interested in watching the battle? Could it be that there's something special about the two geniuses on the stage that is worthy of your attention?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly. He stared at the white-haired youth and said, "That guy is here to ambush us. We'll meet him soon. Snipe you." Ning Xiyuan stared blankly for a moment before revealing an expression of disbelief. "What kind of genius is qualified to snipe you? According to my knowledge, there are only 2 or 3 people in the entire Bloodflame Divine Kingdom." Ji Tianxing smiled and said calmly, "Not only him, there are 3 other young geniuses who are targeting me. Of course, it's their mission to snipe me. Whether or not they succeed is another matter entirely." Ning Xiyuan said without hesitation, "It will definitely fail. Those people are too whimsical." Although the white-haired youth's strength was very strong, his combat experience was very abundant, and he even grasped many powerful divine abilities and ultimate skills. Furthermore, his strength also reached the 6th-level Divine Lord realm. He only used 80% of his strength and easily won after exchanging 200 moves with his opponent. But in the eyes of Ning Xiyuan and Zhen Hong, Ji Tianxing was a war god who had never been defeated before. Just based on those young geniuses participating in the battle today, none was his match. Because he was already a pinnacle Divine Lord powerhouse. Competing in martial arts with these young geniuses was simply bullying people. 2 hours later, it was Zhen Hong's turn to go on stage. Her opponent was called Yu Wucheng, a pinnacle genius of Cloudy Sun County, a wealthy aristocrat with an illustrious family background. This person's strength reached the 5th-level Divine Lord realm and cultivated over 20 kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills. He was more adept at lightning-fast ambushes. The two people exchanged blows on the stage. Yu Wucheng transformed into 7 phantoms, and his true body hid in a corner of the stage. He used incomparably dazzling assassination techniques to drown out Zhen Hong's figure. Zhen Hong couldn't find his true body for the time being, so she followed Ji Tianxing's instructions and used the dragon race's ultimate skills with all her might. As the saying went, a strong person could defeat 10 skilled people. She punched out with the dragon elephant divine fist and broke the divine art shadows that filled the sky, forcing out her opponent's true body. Yu Wuqing was very indignant and wanted to hide himself again to use an even more dazzling divine art. Zhenhong was like a storm, continuously using 4 dragon races' ultimate skills. Dragon Shadow Palm, Heavenly Dragon Strike, and Soaring Dragon Slash were all used. The entire stage was filled with Golden Dragon Divine Light, and dragon roars echoed. Yu Wuqing was beaten until he covered his head and fled like a rat. He barely lasted 4 moves before being knocked to the ground. When Zhenhong used the 5th move, he was severely injured and vomited blood, falling onto the stage. Yu Wuqing was defeated just like that. No matter how strange his divine art was or how fast his movement technique was, he couldn't withstand Zhenhong's violent attacks. After all, Zhenhong's dragon race's ultimate skills were too domineering and specialized in dealing with fancy move. This round of battles finally ended. The 17 young geniuses advanced to the next round. Among them were Ji Tianxing, Zhenhong, and the 4 intermediate godlords under Prince Lian. It was already afternoon, and the scorching sun was even hotter. The nearly 1 million god race members in the plaza were dazzled and delighted. No one was willing to leave. Soon, the 2nd prince and the 3rd prince finished drawing lots. Out of the 17 young geniuses, one was lucky enough to advance to the next round. The other 16 people were divided into 8 pairs to fight on the stage. This round of battles was very crucial. It was the moment that determined the fate of the contestants and tugged at their heartstrings. The victors would enter the top 9 and have the right to enter the Bloodflame Mystic Realm to receive the baptism of the Bloodflame Sacred Tree. The 8 losers would have to fight for the 10th place. The chances were slim. In the first battle, the 2nd prince's confidant defeated a noble genius from the Qianxue County. The 2nd prince's brows relaxed and his expression relaxed. He finally felt somewhat comforted. After all, in this round, Ji Tianxing's opponent wasn't one of his men. Instead, it was a genius from the 5th prince's faction, a white-haired youth named Yi Ningwang. The 2nd and 3rd battles continued one after another. The contestants were the elites of the elites. All of them had extraordinary strength and were proficient in all kinds of divine arts. Every battle was brilliant. All kinds of gorgeous, dazzling, bizarre and strange divine arts were displayed on the stage one by one. The millions of spectators felt their blood boil and their spirits rise. They cheered excitedly from time to time. In the 5th battle, Zhenhong stepped onto the stage again. Her opponent was a foreign race genius from the southern border. He was a skinny youth with the bloodline of the flame wolf. This person's aura was sinister and his willpower was tenacious and resolute. He had the characteristics of the wolf race's bloodline. Most importantly, his strength had reached the peak of the 5th degree realm. He was only 1 step away from the 6th degree realm. When Zhenhong fought with him, the process was exceptionally difficult. From the beginning, she was suppressed by the flame wolf youth. The other party relied on his super-fast speed and rich battle experience to beat Zhenhong back. After exchanging 10 moves, Zhenhong finally erupted with great potential and used the powerful Heavenly Dragon Star-breaking slash. Only then did she defeat the Flame Wolf Youth's various divine arts and injure him, causing him to fall onto the stage covered in blood. However, the Flame Wolf Youth wasn't defeated. He actually boiled his bloodline and took the risk to stimulate his potential, breaking through to the 6th level Divine Monarch realm. Chapter 3047. This battle was a battle that would determine their fate. If they won, they would enter the top 9 and receive the baptism of the Bloodflame Sacred Tree. The Flame Wolf Youth was from a foreign race and could not become a noble in the Bloodflame Divine Kingdom. Naturally, he could not obtain too many cultivation resources and it was difficult for him to stand out. Therefore, he placed all his hopes on this grand ceremony. It was also because of this that he took the risk of burning his bloodline and risking his life. Fortunately, he successfully broke through to the 6th stage. Such tenacious willpower and terrifying wolf-like nature made countless people cry out in alarm. When he successfully broke through, everyone was boiling and erupted into earth-shattering cheers and shouts. Even the nobles and experts on the 4 viewing platforms looked at the Flame Wolf Youth in a new light and admired him. Zhenhong was under great pressure. Even her confidence was shaken. The flame wolf youth became even more ferocious and charged over wantonly, forcing her to retreat. Feeling helpless, she subconsciously turned her head and glanced at Ji Tianxing on the viewing platform. She wanted to know what Ji Tianxing's reaction and expression would be. If Ji Tianxing signaled her to admit defeat, she would rather give up the baptism of the sacred tree and immediately admit defeat. If Ji Tianxing supported her to continue fighting, she would never surrender even if she was seriously injured and unconscious. When she looked at Ji Tianxing, she saw a smiling face and a serious and focused gaze. Young master has never been interested in watching the battle, but he watched the entire process of my battle very seriously. Even if I lose, I can't let him down. This thought flashed through Zhenhong's mind and she immediately became spirited and full of fighting spirit. At this moment, she saw Ji Tianxing's lips move silently. It was lip reading. She immediately understood. Ji Tianxing said 4 words. Reverse blood berserk. Zhenhong's body trembled and her heart was filled with shock and disbelief. Young master actually wants me to use that trump card. Reverse blood berserk was one of the last trump cards of the 18 Dragon Clan's ultimate techniques. After using it, one's bloodline would flow backward and enter a berserk state. Not only would their appearance change, but their combat prowess would also increase by 5 times. Only the divine dragons and the Dragon Blood God clan could use such a powerful skill. After all, if an ordinary god race bloodline were to flow in reverse, they would definitely go mad and self-destruct or burn their bodies on the spot. Only the Dragon clan, whose physical bodies were incomparably strong, could unleash such a self-destructive divine ability. Didn't young master teach me not to reveal too many trump cards? Zhenhong tried to figure out what was going on while he fended off the flame wolf youth's fierce attacks. Could it be that young master is confident that as long as I use the inverse berserk divine ability, I can defeat my opponent? He had only exposed 1 trump card, but he could conceal even more trump cards. I understand now. After understanding Ji Tianxing's intentions, Zhenhong no longer hesitated and immediately used reverse blood berserk. Roar. She suddenly let out a low roar, and her entire body ignited with golden flames that soared into the sky, bursting forth with an incomparably violent aura. Then, nearly 1 million god race people witnessed with their own eyes the shocking changes that happened to her within the raging golden divine flames. Her originally tall and strong body actually expanded violently, expanding to a height of 1,000 feet in the blink of an eye. Her body was as big as a mountain, and she looked the same as before. She still had the appearance of a dragon god warrior, but she was wilder and more violent. Her entire body was covered with golden dragon scales, like a layer of natural golden armor. Her arms and legs bulged with smooth muscle lines, not only filled with strength, but also with a wild beauty. A golden dragon horn more than 30 feet long grew out of her head, and her face was also covered by golden dragon scales, revealing only a pair of blood-red eyes. Under her tailbone, a 60-foot-long 3-pronged dragon tail emerged. Her hands covered in dragon scales had also turned into sharp dragon claws. This was the appearance of the Dragon God clan after going berserk, and also Zhenhong's strongest state. She stood in the sky, looking down at the tiny flame wolf youth, and her entire body burst forth with soaring dragon might and battle intent. Roar. With a piercing dragon roar, she swooped down like a meteor, charging toward the flame wolf youth. The flame wolf youth had long been shocked by her berserk state, and his pupils constricted, and he was on guard. At this moment, he was suppressed by her berserk aura, and his battle intent weakened a lot, and his aura weakened a lot. Sky Wolf transformation. At this critical moment, the flame wolf youth no longer held back and used his trump card. He ignited the flame wolf bloodline again and turned into a 100-meter tall red flame wolf, charging toward Zhenhong with an indomitable will. In the next moment, the 2 giant creatures collided, and their strongest power exploded. Boom! An earth-shattering sound exploded in the arena, shaking the 9 heavens. Golden and crimson divine light blended and exploded, filling the entire arena. The arena shook violently, and the sky-blue shield kept fluctuating. Even the ground of the huge square was shaking, and countless people were shaken to the ground. But no one felt that it was dangerous. They were so excited that their blood was boiling, and they forgot where they were and cheered and shouted. After all, this was the most exciting and hot-blooded battle in this god-blood ceremony. No matter the result, Zhen Hong and the Flame Wolf youth were famous in the capital, and millions of God clan members would remember them. After a long time, the colorful divine light gradually dissipated. The arena regained its clarity, and the winner was decided. Zhen Hong stood in the sky, unharmed, and golden light flickered all over her body, like a goddess of war. No, to be exact, it should be the golden dragon goddess of war. Her expression was calm, and her eyes were emotionless. She looked at the ground without focus. Is this the ultimate power of the dragon god bloodline after the berserk state? Is this the berserk state that even I would be afraid of? She muttered to herself. Although it was a question, her tone was firm, and there was no doubt in it. She closed her eyes and muttered to herself, so it is. Master never lied to me. This is the feeling of ultimate power, so good. At this moment, Zhen Hong finally realized her own strength, and experienced the feeling of being a powerhouse. Her mentality also quietly changed and matured. From the obedient and humble maid captain in the past, she had finally become a descendant of the Dragon God clan. She had self-confidence, a desire for great power, and a vision for the future. She knew. From this moment on, she was no longer ordinary. The Flame Wolf youth's outcome was a little tragic. There were more than 20 wounds all over his body, and they were all deep to the bone. He lay on the arena covered in blood, twitching involuntarily, and groaning in pain. He had already lost. The pain of the physical body was far less than the disappointment and pain in his heart. Why? Why did I meet her? He murmured with lifeless eyes, and his heart was filled with unwillingness. Originally, he could break through on the spot in the arena and reach the 6th level of the Divine Lord realm. This was already a miracle that shocked the capital. He would definitely defeat his opponent, successfully enter the top 9, and get the chance to be baptized by the sacred tree. Everything was so beautiful. From then on, his fate went against the flow, and he became a genius powerhouse that everyone looked up to. But unfortunately, that was still a dream. Now, the dream was shattered.